Chapter 182. In the auction hall on the first floor, the fake auction was also being carried out in an orderly manner. Similarly, the final price was slightly later than the one on the second floor, but it was also set at 30,000 gold. Looking at the auctioneer on the stage, Ferdinand's eyes narrowed slightly, and a hint of pity flashed in his eyes. It wasn't that they hadn't thought of bidding 30,000 gold to get Bruno's 30,000 gold, while bidding 28,000 gold to pay the black-robed leader 28,000 gold. Through this, they could earn some of the gold from the price difference. However, if they were to do this, it would increase the chances of them being exposed in the future. Regardless of whether it was the high-ranking official from the Ministry of Finance behind Bruno or the conferred knight who had brought the parietal bones, both of them were not to be trifled with. Therefore, in order to minimize the chances of them being exposed, they gave up on the chance to earn money. However, now that things had come to this, seeing this scene, a hint of pity flashed in his eyes uncontrollably. He nodded toward the black-robed leader, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, sir. The next transaction in the trading room has been completed. Please follow me." Therefore, he brought the black-robed leader and the others to the trading room on the first floor. On the second floor, Bruno, who was wearing a golden mask, also came to the trading room on the second floor. Both parties opened the door to the trading room at almost the same time and looked inside. On the second floor, Bruno looked toward the trading room. A black-robed man, fake, was already standing there. He walked in, followed by a few subordinates, and smiled at the black-robed man, fake. "I wonder where the parietal bones are?" The black-robed man, fake, asked in a muffled voice, "Where's the money?" Bruno clapped his hands, and one of his subordinates walked in with 10 boxes. "There's 15,000 gold in here. After the transaction is completed, which is 6 hours later, you'll pay the remaining 15,000 gold." The black-robed man, fake, nodded, gestured to his 2 subordinates behind him, and they started to move the boxes. However, before they could move the boxes, Bruno suddenly stopped them. "Wait a minute, before you take the money, I need to check if there's anything wrong with the parietal bones," he said to a middle-aged man behind him. "Let this blacksmith appraise it. Master Harmon has forged superior divine weapons before and is very experienced with the remains of conferred knights. Take out the parietal bones first and let Master Harmon appraise them." Immediately, the atmosphere froze and everyone fell silent. Ferdinand brought the black-robed man to the trading room on the first floor. The black-robed leader took a look and discovered that a fake man wearing a golden mask was already standing there. The black-robed man walked in. The golden-masked man, fake, said, "Hello, where's the skull?" The black-robed man said, "Money in one hand, goods in the other. Where's the money?" The golden-masked man was fake, silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Just as the atmosphere began to become stiff, he nodded and said, "Of course. Bring the money in." The latter part of his sentence was directed outside. A few burly men carrying 10 large sacks walked in. Along the way, clanking sounds could be heard. That was the sound of gold coins colliding. The golden-masked man, fake, said, "That's a total of 15,000 gold coins. I'll pay the remaining 15,000 in 6 hours. How does that sound?" The black-robed man nodded and said, "Sure." As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized square box from his bosom. It turned out that he had been keeping the skull close to him all this time. Ferdinand let out a sigh of relief inwardly. "Thank goodness, I still have the money from selling the remains. There should be no problem now." However, just as he was letting out a sigh of relief inwardly, the black-robed man's words made him feel anxious again. The black-robed man said calmly, "You can stay here to comprehend. Within 6 hours, you're not to leave my sight." Ferdinand immediately frowned and said with a smile, "Sir, striving to attain heaven's perception is no small matter. You'd still need a quiet and secluded environment, right? This is different from what we've agreed on previously." The black-robed man shook his head. "Within 6 hours, the parietal bones are not to leave my sight. If you're not willing, you can call off the deal. After all, there's still many people who want it." He stood there in a domineering manner, like a great mountain that could not be crossed. The aura of a second transition conferred knight was released without reservation, pressing down on everyone. On the second floor, when Bruno mentioned that he wanted to verify the authenticity of the parietal bones, the place fell silent. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the black-robed man, fake, who had not spoken a word. Bruno suddenly said coldly, "Why? You don't dare? It can't be that you've given me a fake parietal bone, right?" Seeing that the atmosphere was getting increasingly solemn, the black-robed man, fake, suddenly started walking toward Bruno and the others. The gazes of the four knights behind Bruno narrowed, and they immediately went forward to block him. However, before they could get close, Feng Xingjian casually performed the domineering, swift, and extremely terrifying ether sword ripples. There was no need for it to reach the limits of 8 times the speed of sound. Just a formless slash at 4 times the speed of sound was already unimaginably terrifying to a first-transition professional. Sounds rang out. The four knights did not see it, did not feel it, and were completely unaware of what had attacked them. By the time they heard the soft sounds, the 4 of them had already become bald. It was as if their heads had been shaved by a hairdresser, and their hair fell to the ground. Feng Xingjian slowly walked up to Bruno, and his gloomy voice rang out. "It's fine if you want to praise it, but the parietal bone can only be touched by one person. If he touches it, you can forget about touching it." Bruno only felt that there seemed to be a pair of extremely sharp eyes staring at him from the darkness of the black robe. He turned to look at the 4 knights who were protecting him and grinned, saying, "Good technique. To be able to cut off their hair without making a sound, it means that you can also take off their heads without making a sound." As expected of a conferred knight, Bruno naturally did not know which other knight-level experts would be able to do this. Sensing the gushing aura from the other party, as well as the miraculous technique from earlier, he immediately confirmed his earlier guess. The person protecting the parietal bone was an extremely powerful conferred knight, but his exact level was unknown. Bruno straightened his body with great difficulty and said, "But even if you're a conferred knight, you can't be so domineering, right? Can't you even appraise it?" Feng Xingjian said coldly, "If there's no effect, you don't have to pay. Just leave the 15,000 gold here first. But only one person can touch the parietal bone. Otherwise, wouldn't it be used by 2 people? It's fine if you want to do that, but you just have to pay more." Master Harmon frowned and said, "I'll only appraise it. I definitely won't secretly use the parietal bone in the process of touching it. Aren't you being too petty?" "Oh." Under the black robe, Feng Xingjian's head seemed to turn over, and a sharp aura gushed out. "You're right. I'm that petty. If I say that only one person can use it, then only one person can touch it." Just as the others were about to argue, Bruno stopped them and said with a clear laugh, "All right, don't you guys trust a conferred knight?" He looked at Feng Xingjian's actions, thought about his methods, and listened to his tone. A name gradually appeared in his mind. Chapter 183. One day ago, in the basement, Ferdinand said, "Although Bruno is a profligate son, he's not an idiot. He might come up with all sorts of ridiculous requests. Therefore, I've thought of an idea." Feng Xingjian closed his eyes to cultivate, and white light shot out from his fingertips. Ferdinand did not think much of it. He had long since gotten used to Feng Xingjian's state of cultivation for almost 24 hours a day. He continued to talk to himself. "Xingjian, with your abilities, you should be able to impersonate someone. It just so happens that this skull comes from the Northern Ice region. And in an academy in the Northern Ice region, there's a headmaster who is famous for his formless sword cheese. However, he's most famous for his pettiness and violent temper." Ferdinand smiled. Hee, there's no one who has not suffered his revenge after offending him. If you can impersonate him, you should be able to suppress Bruno. Of course, such an impersonation could not be done openly. And when dealing with an intelligent person like Bruno, it would usually be more effective to intentionally or unintentionally hint to him, making him feel that he had guessed it himself. Therefore, knowing that the other party was from the Northern Ice region, seeing how the ether sword ripples had stunned the 4 knights, as well as the pettiness in this person's words, Hans Wilson. This name floated into Bruno's mind. "So it's Hans Wilson? coming from the northern ice region and a student of a certain academy, possessing formless slashes that can instantly kill a first transition knight, and having such a temperament of haggling over every little thing. Bruno's face under the golden mask broke into a confident smile. People like him were usually very confident in their own deductions. Since he was certain that the other party was Hans Wilson, he was naturally not worried that the other party would lie to him. How could a conferred knight, a headmaster of an academy, not have such a sense of responsibility? Therefore, he dismissed his subordinates and said, the headmaster's temper is still the same. I wonder if Brother Colin is doing well in the northern ice region? Colin was a genius who had headed to the northern ice region from Curse 5 years ago. He had also joined the Wilson Regional Academy, which Hans Wilson was in. Hearing Bruno's words, Feng Xingjian seemed to be surprised and fell silent. After a while, he said with slight annoyance, I don't understand what you're talking about. Do you still want to trade or not? However, Feng Xingjian's attempt to cover up only made him more certain. He shook his head and said, Of course, I believe your words. Since that's the case, I'll just use this skull. 6 hours later, 30,000 gold coins will be sent to this room. Although Bruno was confident in his decision, since the other party said that he could pay 30,000 gold coins in one lump sum after using them, he naturally wouldn't pretend to be generous and asked the other party to pay 15,000 gold coins first. The attendant at the side breathed a sigh of relief and said, Please follow me to the quiet room. One of his men asked, Young master, do you want us to go with you? Bruno waved his hand and pretended to be magnanimous as he said, It's fine. To sense heaven's perception, one has to go out and do it in absolute silence. It wouldn't be good if there were too many people around. Moreover, with this sir watching, what could possibly happen to me? After that, he smiled and walked out with Feng Xingjian. On the first floor, when the black-robed man mentioned that the other party could not leave his sight, the atmosphere fell silent. After a long period of silence, a bitter laugh rang out from under the fake mask of the golden-masked man. To be honest, I'm just a representative. The person who bought the skull isn't me. However, my master doesn't wish to reveal his identity, so he asked me to bring it over. You know that once there's no progress after using it. A hint of understanding flashed in the black-robed man's eyes. There was nothing wrong with the reason given by the other party. After all, whether one could attain heaven's perception or not was greatly related to one's aptitude and temperament. If there was no progress after using the skull, it would naturally be very embarrassing. One might even be labeled as having no aptitude by others. This was especially so in the great clans. Once one was labeled as such by competitors, it would be very troublesome. One might even be looked down upon by the clan head and elders of the clan. The black-robed man had seen too many of such shameless people. Therefore, he did not take the other party's attempt to cover up to heart. He merely shook his head and said, Don't worry. Tell your master to just put on a mask. I have no intention of investigating his identity. If he doesn't even have this bit of responsibility, then he can just give up on this deal. He reiterated, But no matter what, the parietal bones must always be within my sight. The fake man with the gold mask let out a breath and said, Then please follow me to meet my master. On the other side, Bruno followed Feng Xingjian to a quiet room and sat down. Feng Xingjian threw a glance at him and slowly took out a small gift box. Bruno looked at the box, his eyes filled with excitement and greed. However, this was a conferred knight, and he did not dare to be rash. Feng Xingjian opened the small gift box, revealing a piece of the parietal bones. Seeing that Bruno was about to reach out for it, he placed his hand in front of him. Looking at Bruno's nervous expression, he said calmly, Drink a cup of water first. He'll be yours for the next 6 hours. However, you don't want to be startled awake during the sensing process due to thirst and a sore throat, right? Bruno smiled. Thank you for your advice. He had already completely treated the other party as a conferred knight. Taking the teapot from Feng Xingjian, Bruno took a sip. Feng Xingjian said, All right, just moisten your throat. Don't drink too much, or you'll wake up from the suffocation. Bruno put down the teapot obediently, looked at Feng Xingjian, who was shrouded in a black robe, and said, "Now, is it okay?" Fang Xingjian pushed the small gift box over slowly. He had long since asked about the method of using the parietal bones. He said, "Place your hand on it and focus all your attention on it. Feel the waves bit by bit." Of course, Bruno had already asked about the method of using the parietal bones. He controlled his emotions and slowly placed his hand on the parietal bones, starting to focus his attention on it. However, this was just an ordinary piece of bone. How could Bruno really sense anything? A minute passed. Although Bruno focused his attention on the bone like never before, he seemed to feel something, but at the same time, he seemed to not feel anything. Of course, what he felt was just his misconception. Anyone who calmed down and focused their attention on a certain part of their body would feel something. He could not help but ask, "Master, I seem to don't speak." Fang Xingjian said, "Use your heart to feel it." Bruno suppressed his curiosity. Gradually, he felt as if his brain was gradually heating up, and there seemed to be countless light spots flashing in his eyes. "Master, Master, I seem to feel." Chapter 184. The world spun as endless memories, illusions, and space seemed to be stretched and shortened. Bruno only felt as if countless things were flashing past before his eyes and then disappearing. Is this the feeling of heaven's perception? Fang Xingjian's figure slowly appeared. Feel it well. This is the feeling of heaven's perception. Bruno let out a moan, feeling that his brain and limbs were extremely relaxed. It was as if there were all sorts of warm currents flowing into his body. As for what happened next, he had no memory at all. Fang Xingjian waved his hand in front of the other party's face. After seeing that the other party had no reaction, he pushed open the screen at the side and walked out from a door. The moment he walked out, Robert, who was also wearing a black robe, walked over and asked nervously, "How was it?" Fang Xingjian immediately took off his clothes, changed into a new set of clothes, and put on his mask. At the same time, he said, "It's settled. Later on, go in and pretend to be me. If I don't rush over in 6 hours, send him out. There shouldn't be a problem." Robert stuck his head out to look at Bruno, who was in the room. Seeing that the other party was in a daze and would occasionally laugh foolishly, he asked, "What did you give him to eat? Did you get it from Netherworld Valley?" "I wanted to get some non-lethal and non-addictive things from them, like some hallucinogenic poisonous mushrooms or something." Fang Xingjian tidied his clothes and said calmly, "But I saw something good with them." "What is it?" Robert asked curiously. Fang Xingjian smiled and said, "In my hometown, this thing is called Big." The black-robed man followed behind the golden-masked, fake man, taking many turns in the passageway. After about 2 minutes, the black-robed leader suddenly came to a stop and said coldly, "You've been to this place before. Are you going in circles with me?" His voice was filled with a baleful aura and killing intent. It was as if the surrounding space would turn into a river of blood in an instant. The fake, golden-masked man's body froze. In order to leave enough time for Bruno and Fang Xingjian, he naturally wanted to delay for a while. However, the black-robed leader's words had caused him to freeze in fright. It was because the conferred knight's aura was too astonishing. In that instant, the fake, golden-masked man felt as if there was blood gushing out from his nostrils. The smell of blood, which seemed to have materialized, was too terrifying. Just as he was in a daze from shock, Ferdinand walked over and said with a smile, "I'm sorry. This person might not be familiar with the structure of the buildings here. Sir, let me bring you over." Looking at the black-robed man who had left with Ferdinand, the fake man with the golden mask slowly exhaled and took off his mask, revealing Anthony's face. "This guy, his aura is too strong. Is this a conferred knight? It seems that the headmaster has never shown his true abilities in front of us." Ferdinand had naturally rushed over after receiving the news that Fang Xingjian had settled the matter. He brought the black-robed leader to a secret room, and when he opened it, the masked Fang Xingjian was already sitting inside. Finally, at the final moment, Ferdinand could not help but feel a little relaxed. However, he knew that it was precisely at this moment that he could not afford to relax. He kept his cool, bowed, and said, "Then I won't disturb the two of you anymore. I'll come back 6 hours later." As he left, the black-robed leader looked at Feng Xingjian and said calmly, "You're the one who bid for the skull?" "That's right." Feng Xingjian did not show any signs of weakness in terms of aura. He pointed to the table and said, "Then let's begin." Sensing the parietal bones on the table before him, Feng Xingjian's heart stirred slightly. Under the black-robed leader's gaze, he slowly pressed his hand on the parietal bones, and then continued to focus his attention on it. Gradually, he felt as if his consciousness had drifted out of his body, and there seemed to be countless pieces of information gushing toward him from the surrounding void space. Temperature, light, air composition, color, humidity. These were just the most basic ones. As more and more information gushed toward Feng Xingjian's brain, the darkness in his eyes seemed to shatter with a loud rumble, and the countless pieces of information once again formed a new vision in his mind. A vision that was even more detailed, clearer, and more useful than the naked eye. Is this heaven's perception? The countless pieces of information contained in the ether particles continued to gush into his brain, but he did not feel any discomfort. The tremendous amount of information that was rumored to be able to drive a person crazy, the tremendous amount of information that could make one extremely confused, Feng Xingjian felt that he was not affected in the slightest. It was because his sword arts talent was the best in the world, and the attributes that sword arts required, such as fortitude, courage, and determination, were things that he had long since possessed and were very strong in. At the next moment, his vision seemed to change once again. Feng Xingjian looked at his stats window and felt as if there were countless white spots of light flashing in his mind. Are these skill seeds? Heaven's perception. After entering the second transition, one would be able to understand their own body better through the information transmitted from the ether particles. He would even be able to see the skill seeds in his mind, with each light spot representing a skill. Feng Xingjian could sense that the brightest spot in the middle was flashing with endless silver light. That was the mental cultivation method, universal sword dominance lunisolar. Next to him, the one that was slightly dimmer was the waves Sonido sword zephyr waves. And among the other light spots, the brightest one was the supreme mist-wind sword, which was circling around them. As for the rest of the starlight, they were the various sword techniques that he had learned. It was said that after reaching the second transition, not only would one be able to see the existence of these skill seeds, but they would also be able to control these skill seeds as if they were controlling computer information, deleting or synthesizing them. Deleting meant forgetting these skill seeds, while synthesizing meant adding a supplementary skill to the main skill, combining the two skills into one. The synthesized skill would be the main skill, and the special effects of the supplementary skill would be mutated. Of course, the two synthesized skills had to be at the maximum level. The success rate of synthesizing was related to the ether particles' sensory abilities. Of course, regardless of success or failure, the supplementary skill would disappear or be forgotten. When Feng Xingjian heard this for the first time, he felt that those in the first transition were like ordinary players who could only train and level up silently. And those in the second transition were like cheating players, already able to control a portion of the data in their stats window. Of course, this was just an analogy. After all, this was the real world and not a game. The killing techniques of Huang Lin, the first prince, and the headmaster were clearly terrifying skills that had been synthesized countless times. This was especially so for the first prince. The secret manuals of the ancient path of hell recorded countless ultimate killing techniques that could only be obtained after synthesis. Each of them had astonishing prowess, and this was what he relied on to suppress countless experts single-handedly. And Garcia's warriors like Mamukia did not have any legacies and could only rely on themselves to figure things out. Their abilities were worlds apart from the Empire's conferred knights. Looking at the hundreds of dazzling skill seeds, Feng Xingjian smiled. After reaching the second transition, his sword arts talent would be able to be unleashed at an even more terrifying level. Other people would be working hard to cultivate their skills, hesitating on whether or not to synthesize them. They would be overjoyed if they succeeded, then disheartened if they failed, and continue to research the history of synthesizing different skills. Fang Xingjian would definitely be crazily smashing his sword art skills into them. Because his cultivation speed was fast enough, he was not worried that the synthesis would fail. He could not wait to smash his skills into the Ether Sword Ripples and Supreme Mistwind Sword. It's a pity that I'm only experiencing the feeling of Heaven's perception and not the real Heaven's perception. I can sense the existence of the skill seeds, but I can't really control them. Everything will have to wait until I've completed the second transition. Chapter 185. In the next moment, Fang Xingjian no longer observed the skill seed. Instead, he continued to receive the information from the ether particles, familiarizing himself with the feeling of Heaven's perception. He kept on memorizing this feeling, getting used to it. He wanted to retain this feeling so that he could truly attain Heaven's perception in the future. Throughout the entire process, although he felt that his brain was not used to it, he did not feel too much pain or that he could not take it. Other than some basic physical information, the ether particles also contained information about many people. Let's eat noodles tonight. Boss is going to deduct my salary again. What should I do next month? I want to become a knight. I need to work hard on my martial arts. All sorts of thoughts, memories, or voices were captured by the ether particles and then left behind in them. When conferred knights sensed the ether particles, they would naturally receive these personal information as well. This feeling was like the smell in the air, but it was 100 or 10,000 times more subtle and ancient than the smell in the air. It was because these personal information could have been carried by the ether particles from tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years ago, from tens, hundreds, or even thousands of kilometers away. The higher a conferred knight's level was, the deeper their perception of ether particles would be, and the more personal information they would receive. Things like personal information could only be sensed at level 25 and above. In such a situation, one could only rely on one's willpower and temperament to overcome it. Once one got lost in it, or even mistook other people's memories as one's own, one would naturally go crazy or even become a fool. There was no lack of conferred knights in history who had suddenly gone crazy during their cultivation and turned into lunatics. Therefore, conferred knights were extremely careful in the process of sensing ether particles. They had to use their boundless willpower and perseverance to maintain their true nature. However, right now, the process of sensing ether particles was extremely easy for Fang Xingjian. Although he was borrowing the parietal bones and the amount of information he could sense was not that great, it was also because he had the world's best sword arts talent. Therefore, his willpower, courage, perseverance, and other aspects had long reached top-notch standards. He did not know how heaven-defying his current performance was due to his unparalleled talent in terms of will, courage, perseverance, and memory. His ability to sense ether particles was 10 or even 100 times that of ordinary people. Once he successfully stepped into the realm of Heaven's perception, his cultivation speed would also be much higher than that of ordinary people. Even the difficulties of various illusions and chaotic memories would not affect him in the slightest. On the other side, the black-robed man had been staring at Fang Xingjian the entire time. He wasn't just staring at the skull in Fang Xingjian's hand. He was also staring at Fang Xingjian's body. This lad, when ordinary people come into contact with Heaven's perception, they won't be able to handle the tremendous amount of information entering their brains at once. It's either headaches, hallucinations, excitement, or madness. I have to rely on my willpower to suppress them. But his current state, the black-robed man looked at Fang Xingjian, feeling that he was too peaceful. Could it be that he has yet to enter the state of Heaven's perception, even with the help of the skull? No, that's impossible. No one would give up on this chance. Then, there's only one explanation. The black-robed man looked at Fang Xingjian with some astonishment. This lad is a genius in sensing ether particles. The gears in his head started to turn. I heard that the person who is most likely to be able to buy the skull this time around is a lad by the name of Bruno. He said that he would offer 30,000 gold to buy the skull. Is this lad Bruno? Humph, Seems like in a few years' time, another super genius will appear and cursed. Just like that, Feng Xingjian only felt that a short period of time had passed. But when he reacted once again, he felt that his hand had loosened, and the skull had been taken back by the black-robed man. It was only then that Feng Xingjian gradually recovered from the world of heaven's perception. However, his mind was still immersed in it. 6 hours are up? Yes. As they spoke, Ferdinand walked in. Feng Xingjian said directly, I need to consolidate my thoughts. You guys can hand over the money yourselves. Next, Bruno would pay the money, and Ferdinand would then send the money to the black-robed man. Feng Xingjian could no longer be bothered with all this. Right now, he was fully immersed in the feeling of heaven's perception, trying to consolidate this feeling. It was only after Bruno and the black-robed man left that Ferdinand, Robert, and Anthony came to Feng Xingjian's secret room. Looking at Feng Xingjian, who was still in the midst of comprehending, a hint of excitement flashed on Ferdinand's face. To think that he has really succeeded. Ha! That lad Bruno still thinks that he has really entered the state of heaven's perception for 6 hours. Anthony said with pity, It's a pity. Why didn't he just earn some money from it? If Bruno were to bid us 30,000, we could have bid 28,000 or 26,000 to the black-robed man and the others. This way, we would be able to earn over 1,000 gold. Ferdinand shook his head. Bruno is a flamboyant person. Moreover, with so many buyers having heard the price of 30,000 gold, once the black-robed man realizes that he has received less money, he'll immediately be in big trouble. There are so many important characters here today. Do you want them to come knocking on your door one by one? He looked at Feng Xingjian and said, How is it? How is the feeling of heaven's perception? Feng Xingjian finally opened his mouth, exhaled, and said, It's like reading tens of thousands of children's diaries in one go. Feng Xingjian rubbed his forehead and said, But I feel that I've reached a bottleneck in my realm. He put out his palm and touched the surrounding space. It was as if he could feel ether particles flowing past his fingertips. I can feel that I'm just one step away. Just one step, and I'll be able to attain heaven's perception. Saying this, he looked in the direction of the three of them and said, I'll have to thank you for your help this time around. How about this? I'll keep 10,000 gold from selling the remains. You guys can split the remaining money. Hearing this, Ferdinand was slightly stunned. Anthony gulped and said hesitantly, This isn't too good, is it? Robert was completely dazzled by the countless gold coins and became extremely excited. Even if they were to take 10,000 gold from selling the remains, each of them would still have around 3,000 gold. How huge of a sum was this? For aristocrats like Hailong, it was already extremely painful to take out tens of gold, let alone 3,000 gold to give to them. Feng Xingjian shook his head and said, This is what you guys deserve. Of course, it was not because he had found his conscience and decided to give the three of them money. It was because what they had done today had been too daring. They had almost cheated the strongest group of aristocrats in Cursed, as well as a conferred knight. If the three of them had not received any money, and all the benefits had been taken away by Feng Xingjian, they would feel indignant and expose Feng Xingjian. If that were to happen, Feng Xingjian would be in even more trouble. In comparison, what Feng Xingjian needed the most right now was to make good use of the time to absorb what he had gained today and truly attain heaven's perception. Not only would he be able to recover a large portion of his battle prowess, he would also have a chance to participate in the regional selection. Therefore, everyone was happy. The four of them each received their own share, while Feng Xingjian left the money with Ferdinand and returned to the villa. However, the moment he returned, he saw that Manny was already sitting on his sofa, looking at him with great interest and saying, Xingjian, you seem to be a little different? And where did you go so late at night? Chapter 186. Seeing Manny's appearance, as well as Manny's sudden question, Feng Xingjian's heart skipped a beat. However, his expression did not change in the slightest. He sat behind his desk, as usual, quietly looking in Manny's direction with his eyes closed, and said, You're here to chat with me so late at night? Manny smiled, as if he did not mind his earlier question. However, after he stopped smiling, his countenance suddenly turned extremely solemn. Initially, I didn't want to come over for this matter, but the old man is even more embarrassed to come. But it's not as if no one came to inform you. Fang Xingjian frowned and asked, "What on earth is it? Don't be wishy-washy, just say it." Manny smiled bitterly and said, "Countess is the only son of the Treja clan's clan head." Almost at the instant Manny said this, he felt an intense, killing intent gushing toward him. This feeling was as if someone had pressed a blade against his throat, making him feel extremely fearful and uncomfortable. "Old man, you're really going to get me killed. Why should I accept this job? This won't do. I'll have to ask for an additional 100 gold when I get back." They had initially considered not telling Fang Xingjian, but as long as Fang Xingjian was not deaf, he would eventually find out about this. Rather than letting him be the last to know, they might as well inform him in advance. Swallowing his saliva, Manny continued, "Countess's uncle is a guy who went missing 10 years ago. He's a conferred knight. We've only just found out about this as well. He's clearly one of the Treja clan's trump cards. This is nothing much. Even a conferred knight would not be able to protect his own nephew so easily. However, he went to the imperial capital 5 years ago, and just 3 months ago, he became one of the 5 deputy commanders of the imperial capital's imperial guards. All of this was achieved with the first prince's help. Based on our understanding, it was because he was unable to leave behind any descendants that the first prince and the Treja clan's clan head developed him into a hidden card. You should know that the position of the commander of the Imperial Guards is quite different to the royal family." Seeing that Fang Xingjian was still not saying a word, Manny seemed to feel that the air was getting heavier and heavier. He coughed and continued, "Countess is already a cripple." He coughed and continued, "Mongol Royal Academy's headmaster Oliver has crippled the tendons in his arms and legs. His 5 attributes will never exceed 10 points, and he can no longer use his waves and mental cultivation method. He's really a cripple. There's not much difference whether he's dead or alive. Moreover, he's been stripped of his knight status and has become a commoner. And the Treja clan's request is very simple. They want to spare Countess's life so that he can continue the Treja clan's lineage. As a price, Countess's uncle, Adri, will betray the first prince. As a deputy commander of the Imperial Guards, he will become one of us, which means he will become one of the second prince's men. As a price, Countess's uncle, Adri, will betray the first prince. As the deputy commander of the Forbidden Army, he will become one of us, which is the second prince's man. Xingjian, if Adri were to submit to us, you'll know of the benefits to the second prince's control over the imperial capital and to deal a blow to the first prince's momentum. And the price we'll have to pay is just to hand over a cripple in our hands to him. The Treja clan will guarantee that Countess will never leave his home for the rest of his life." Looking at the eerily silent Fang Xingjian, Manny patted him on the shoulder and said, "Xingjian, the overall situation is of utmost importance." Fang Xingjian's brows relaxed and his eyelids drooped. He looked like a 10,000-year-old iceberg. "From the very beginning, ever since I was young, I've only wanted to focus on wielding my sword, pursuing the highest realm of sword arts alone. However, the world is unfair. In this world, those who focus wholeheartedly on doing something behind closed doors will not be able to succeed. Connections, conspiracies, the ways of the world. If one's heart is filled with too many distracting thoughts, how can one have the chance to appreciate the scenery at the top? All of them hold positions of authority without doing anything, forming cliques, making it impossible for me to practice my sword arts in peace. This is so frustrating, so frustrating." In that instant, Manny stood up abruptly. Although Fang Xingjian's words were mixed with a lot of Chinese terms, such as corpses, demons, thoughts, and so on, Manny did not really understand them. He felt as if there was a ferocious beast baring its fangs and claws at him, waiting to devour him. He looked at Fang Xingjian with a grim expression and said, "Xingjian, don't be rash. Also, in order to get your forgiveness, they're willing to compensate you with 5,000 gold. This is enough to buy a top-notch level 19 inferior divine weapon." Fang Xingjian's aura gradually weakened and dissipated. It was as if he had once again become a harmless student. It was as if what Manny had seen earlier was just an illusion. Fang Xingjian smiled. "Don't worry, I won't act recklessly." Manny nodded, but he still felt a little uneasy. He had already made up his mind to send someone over to keep an eye on Fang Xingjian for 24 hours a day, so that he would not cause any trouble. After Manny left, Fang Xingjian let out a cold laugh. Fang Xingjian had also been an ordinary person in the past. He had once thought of cultivating in silence, becoming stronger, and eventually reaching the top. However, ever since he had been harmed in Demonic City and ended up in a foreign land, he had been transformed by the purple flames. He had lost all emotions, and all that was left in his heart was fury and vengeance. However, his thoughts had become clearer, especially after his mental cultivation method had mutated. His thoughts and his heart had also become increasingly clear. Society's resources were controlled by those in a higher position. Therefore, regardless of which line of work it was, as long as one wanted to stand out and become stronger, they would definitely be recruited by those in a higher position. They would also have to abide by the social rules they had set. While receiving benefits, they would also be oppressed or exploited. This was unavoidable. It did not matter if the rules were dark or bright, kind or cruel. The darkness of the world was like a cage, imprisoning his heart. If he wanted to ask for true peace, true freedom of the mind, then he could only slash it with his sword, slaying all the external demons before him, in exchange for a peace of mind. He slowly stood up, and with a step, he was like a cool breeze blowing out of the villa. Then, accompanied by streams of sword cheese, he took another 3 steps and exited Cursed Royal Academy, heading into Cursed City. Countess was someone he had to kill. However, if he did so, it would mean that he had completely broken off relations with many people, affecting the overall situation. He might even be hunted down by many experts in Cursed. However, with the value he had displayed, it was not enough to kill him. However, if he were to imprison Fang Xingjian, it would also affect his ability to participate in the regional selection. Therefore, before he killed Countess, he planned to spend the 10,000 gold he had on hand to buy equipment, medicinal ointments, and supplements. The 10,000 gold would be enough to cover his expenses for the next 3 months. At most, after killing Countess, he would hide for 3 months and then participate in the regional selection. As long as one was an official knight, they would have the right to participate in the regional selection. And once one passed the regional selection and became a conferred knight, then killing a piece of trash like Countess would be nothing. The circulation of the mental cultivation method in his mind became increasingly intense, and his proficiency in it increased at a crazy rate. Under the tremendous pressure, he sought another breakthrough. This was especially so since Fang Xingjian had just reached the bottleneck of heaven's perception. He could only feel that the existence of ether particles seemed to be getting increasingly clearer as his mental cultivation method continued to circulate. However, there was still a layer of fog-like thing shrouding his heart, preventing him from truly achieving a breakthrough. He had a feeling that as long as he killed Countess, he would be able to completely resolve this karma in his heart. With his mind at ease, he would be able to truly achieve a breakthrough and reach the realm of heaven's perception, giving him a chance to pursue the second transition. Chapter 187. Coming up to Ferdinand, Fang Xingjian said directly, "I want to spend all my money within a day to buy equipment, medicinal ointments, and all sorts of useful things." Ferdinand was stunned for a moment, but seeing how serious Fang Xingjian was, he did not say much. He merely nodded and said, "All right, come with me." Therefore, Fang Xingjian followed Ferdinand through the streets and alleys of Cursed. After making many turns, they finally came to a sewer. After entering the sewer, they continued to make many turns. After about 5 minutes, a loud commotion finally gushed into Fang Xingjian's ears. Ferdinand smiled and said, "Cursed is the pearl of the great western region, with countless product from the west coast gathered here. However, those who are really rich can only do so. Many of the products are prohibited from being sold by the government, and that's why there's a black market." Fong Xingjian slowly walked past him, controlling the sword cheese that were like a gentle breeze and sweeping out. Countless people in the underground black market shivered slightly, feeling as if the temperature had dropped. The bustling scene of the underground market also appeared in Fong Xingjian's mind. Ferdinand asked, "How is it? What do you want to buy first?" "Weapons. I want a sword," Fong Xingjian said, patting the ordinary metal sword on his belt. He had long wanted a sword, but he had never had the chance to get one. Up until now, a metal sword would shatter if he used just the slightest bit of force. Ferdinand smiled and said, "Come with me." As he walked by himself, Fong Xingjian's mind kept on outlining the scenes he passed by. There were people who practiced martial arts with swords and sabers in their hands, and there were all sorts of stalls in the densely packed alleys. Some of them had many pieces of meat and leather of unknown quality. Some of them were bottles and jars, emitting various colored medicinal ointments and medicine. There were even ferocious beasts that were alive. There was a huge wolf that was 4 to 5 meters long, a black bear that was the size of a tank, and a gorilla with 3 heads that kept on howling at Fong Xingjian, who was passing by. All kinds of novel things that he had never seen before kept appearing in front of Fong Xingjian, causing him to be a little surprised. In the past, he had focused on cultivation and did not have much money. This was the first time he had come to such an underground black market. However, Ferdinand was clearly very familiar with this place. After making a few turns, he had already entered an area filled with the sounds of metal striking. Looking at the many smiths by the roadside and the weapons placed casually in the stalls, Ferdinand said in a soft voice, "These stalls are all selling ordinary weapons for non-night use. I'll bring you to a good place where you can buy the Empire's divine weapon." Fong Xingjian nodded and followed Ferdinand to the entrance of a huge shop. It was a huge stone house that had been forcefully embedded into the wall and had been dug out from the ground. Before they even got close, they could feel a gush of heat gushing toward them, as if they had come to the mouth of a volcano. Upon arriving, they could see rows and rows of weapon racks. Fong Xingjian casually picked up a long sword and could see the cold gleam on it. There were faint patterns on it, and with just a slight glance, there was a sense of sharpness piercing toward the eyes. It was obvious that it was extremely sharp. This longsword seemed to have reached the pinnacle of cold weapon craftsmanship. Although it was not an Empire's divine weapon and did not have a grade, it was still much better than the longsword in Fong Xingjian's hand. Ferdinand led Fong Xingjian in with great familiarity and shouted, "Welcome the guest, welcome the guest. A big client has arrived." A strong man walked out. His upper body was bare and shiny, as if he was the strongest bodybuilder on earth. When he saw Ferdinand, he said impatiently, "It's you again, you rascal. You're just looking and not buying. I don't have the time to entertain you." Ferdinand smiled and said, "Hee, it's not me who wants to buy. It's my friend who wants to buy." Ferdinand pointed to Fong Xingjian behind him and said, "It's a really big customer. There's no need to bring out ordinary goods. I know that you have a few Empire's divine weapons." That strong man's brows twitched and said, "Empire's divine weapons are forbidden items. We don't sell them here." Ferdinand grinned and took out 10 mortgage slips from his pocket. They were all things that Ferdinand would take out for transactions after he had deposited Fong Xingjian's money into the bank. It was a little similar to pen and paper. However, the Empire did not have a unified bank across the entire country. The trustworthiness of these mortgage slips depended entirely on the bank's credit rating. However, it was still much better than Ferdinand and Fong Xingjian moving a chest of money. As for the secret auction of a human skull, due to the need to keep it a secret and the requirement for the goods to be delivered at the same time, the transaction would naturally be settled in cash. Looking at the numbers on the mortgage slips, the boss felt as if his eyes were swaying. He cried out in his heart, "Fat sheep, big fat sheep." He immediately changed his expression and went up to Fong Xingjian with a smile, saying, "Sir, what kind of weapon would you like? We have sabers, spears, staffs, armors, and helmets. Just tell me what you want." "I want a sword," Fong Xingjian said. "It must be an Empire's divine weapon, or even an inferior divine weapon." That strong man frowned, We don't have any inferior divine weapons here. However, we do have 2 level 9 longswords. Come with me to take a look." Therefore, the 2 of them followed the strong man to the depths of the stone house. They walked up to a secret door and then went in deeper, arriving at a secret room filled with weapons. There were a total of 12 strong men guarding this place. It was clear that these were the best weapons in the shop. That strong man ordered someone to bring out 2 long swords and bring them to Feng Xingjian. He first drew out a blue-sheathed long sword and introduced it proudly. This sword is called the Fiery Thunderbolt. The body of the sword is forged from 13 types of alloys. Regardless of whether it's toughness, or sharpness, it's second to none among level 9 divine weapons. Moreover, there are prints personally engraved by a master blacksmith and fire paste poured into it. As long as it has slight friction with the air, it'll be able to produce high temperatures and kill enemies. With that, he swung the long sword, and hints of sparks flew out from the longsword's wound. He then picked up the sword sheath and said, "This sword sheath was also forged meticulously. Not only is there a layer of fire insulation, but there's also a large amount of fire paste. Once the fire paste on the longsword is used up, we'll just have to insert it back into the sword sheath, and we'll be able to use it again." Feng Xingjian nodded, looked at the other sword, and said, "Then what about this one?" The strong man put away the fiery thunderbolt and picked up the pitch-black longsword that seemed to be emitting waves of deathly aura. He became even prouder. "This one is even more amazing." As he slowly drew out the long sword, a series of soft buzzing sounds rang out from the sword. Even Ferdinand felt a little irritated when he heard this buzzing sound. Chapter 188. What appeared before Feng Xingjian and Ferdinand was a long sword that was completely black. Its blade was streamlined, but there were many strange holes and prints on it. The muscular boss introduced, "This sword's Demon's Howl." Putting aside the sword's blade, it's a high-grade Empire's divine weapon that's comparable to the Fiery Thunderbolt. And the most special thing about it is the 123 wind prints on its body. As long as it swings the sword quickly and slashes through the air, it'll produce a sound similar to the Demon's Howl, causing the opponent to be frustrated or even infuriated. As the long sword slashed through the air, sobbing sounds could be heard, as if it was a female ghost crying. Hearing this voice, the muscular boss, Ferdinand, and even the 12 men guarding the armory furrowed their brows, feeling vaguely irritated. However, Feng Xingjian was expressionless. His willpower was enough to easily overcome a sound technique of this level. He merely looked at the black longsword and nodded, saying, "How much?" The muscular boss wore an elated expression and said, "Fixed price, 500 gold. Feng Xingjian pouted at Ferdinand and said, "I'll buy it." Taking out the level 9 Empire's divine weapon, the Demon's Howl, Ferdinand said helplessly, "You should at least offer a price." "I don't have the time." Feng Xingjian shook his head and said, "Is there any medicinal paste or food here that could directly increase one's attributes, or even potential?" Ferdinand grinned and said, "Of course there is, but these things are very expensive. Most of them are not even as good as you training hard on your own. Bring me over to take a look." In front of a shop filled with the smell of medicine, an old lady with white hair and a face full of wrinkles opened her mouth, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. She pointed to the bottle of medicine in her hand and said, "Bones of a wind bird, eyeballs of a mountain eagle, and a secret medicine formed from 56 types of ferocious beasts, spider medicine. It can increase a person's reaction attribute by at most 3 points. It's useless to take it repeatedly? Of course it's useless. How much?" 3,000 gold. Feng Xingjian nodded, "I'll buy it." Wait a minute. Ferdinand had just opened his mouth when he could only hold his forehead helplessly, handing over the pawned heart to the old lady unwillingly. In a shop that was covered by flowers and trees, making the entire underground tunnel look like a forest, a man wearing a headscarf and holding a puppy in his arms stared at Feng Xingjian in a daze. After hearing his question, he looked at a stalk of herb that was emitting a faint green glow and said, "Heart-linking grass." Each stock can stimulate potential, but it's poisonous. You can only eat 10 stalks a day at most, and it will increase your potential by 1,000 points. Feng Xingjian asked, "Can a Netherworld Valley's antidote be neutralized?" The adorable girl who was hugging the puppy thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "It should be possible. But even so, eating 100 plants at most won't have any effect because the human body has already adapted and produced antibodies." "How much for 100 stalks?" 1,000 gold. "Give me 100 stalks." Ferdinand let out a deep sigh and took out the 5 mortgage slips, feeling a slight heartache. He felt that each payment was like a stab to his kidney. "Let's go, Ferdinand." Feng Xingjian grabbed the heart-linking grass in his hands and started eating it quickly. He then poured in the antidote that he had brought along with him. Ever since he had been poisoned, he had developed the habit of bringing antidotes with him as if they were water. Ferdinand said with a pained heart, "These are all hard-earned money. How can you spend it so casually?" Feng Xingjian said, "It's not just casually. They're all things that I need." He said to Ferdinand, "You must remember that no matter how much money you save up, it'll just be ordinary scrap metal. Money will only have value if you take it out and spend it on something meaningful." Although Ferdinand still felt a heartache, after hearing Feng Xingjian's words, he vaguely felt that there was some logic to it. In a shop that looked like a pet shop, there were all sorts of glowing rabbits, huge wolves with 2 heads, white tigers with wings, and many other ferocious beasts. Feng Xingjian looked at the sexy lady boss, who was covered in tattoos and dressed in beast skin, and asked, "If I want to level up, which ferocious beast would be the fastest to buy?" The lady boss smiled and pointed to a cage with pitch-black fur that looked like steel needles. She said, "This is the needle hair technique. If you want to kill things to level up, this is the best choice. 1 gold coin for 100 of them. I'll have as many as you want." This type of rat did not have any value at all. It survived purely by relying on its ability to reproduce, which was many times stronger than ordinary rats. However, it was also because of this that it was cheap and good. It became a type of ferocious beast that countless people would purchase to level up and gain experience. Feng Xingjian nodded as well. "Then I'll take this." In a shop that had swords, sabers, armor, medicine, small ferocious beasts, and almost everything else, a short man looked at Feng Xingjian with a smile and asked, "Sir, what are you looking for?" Feng Xingjian asked, "Is there anything that can fill one's stomach, replenish one's vital energy and blood, and is easy to carry around?" "Yes, of course." The short boss walked into the shop and shouted, "Wait here." Not long later, he came back with a small cloth bag and took out 3 purple pills from it. He said, "This was smuggled over from Uranlis with great difficulty. It was made by the mages there." Feng Xingjian picked up a pill the size of a fingernail and asked, "What is this?" "The people there call this magic bean. It's made from the concentrated essence of over 10 types of ferocious beasts. It's said that mages' magic energy has also been added to it. If an ordinary person eats one, they won't need to eat for 10 days. Even for martial arts practitioners like you, if they eat one, it'll be sufficient for an entire day's training." Feng Xingjian naturally did not have enough to eat one a day. However, he still smiled and asked, "How much is this?" Ferdinand could not hold it in any longer and said, "Xingjian, it's not like you're going on an expedition. Why are you buying this?" Feng Xingjian did not mind and asked, "How much?" "This is a smuggled product, and there aren't many of them. However, seeing that you're so sincere, I'll sell it to you at a lower price." The short boss said, 3 gold for one." Feng Xingjian nodded, "Give me 300. Ferdinand cast a resentful glance at Feng Xingjian, but eventually handed over the mortgage onto the latter's urging. Just like that, the two of them spent a total of 6 hours, and the 10,000 gold coins that Ferdinand had brought with him were almost all gone. Feng Xingjian finally got to enjoy the feeling of being rich and cultivating. It was extremely convenient. And now, he still had a long sword, Demonis Howl, and 300 magic beans as rations. As for the rest of the money, he had already exchanged them for various items and eaten them on the spot, or killed the needle fur rats to level up. He had finally reached level 19, which was the highest level for the first transition. Adding on to the results of his cultivation during this period of time, as well as the fact that his waves had risen by another level after 24 hours of cultivation a few days ago, his attributes had become name Fang, Xingjian, age 17, occupation Wind Shadow, sword divinity level. Level 19 strength 57 plus 5 agility, 191 plus 5 reaction, 68 endurance, 50 flexibility. 52. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility. 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing sword techniques, 94 sets training sword techniques, 12 sets supreme, Mistwind sword level 30 radiant light, sword technique, level 18 ether divine, art level 1 genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, high agility motion vision, heightened reflexes, perfect muscles, elementary berserkness, unparalleled sword intent. 95 out of 100, potential 11,000 point increase / day waves, level 6 Sonido Sword Zephyr. Waves mental cultivation method level 3, universal, sword dominance Lunisolo. With that, Fang Xingjian's abilities increased once again. With 196 points in agility, he could break through 10 times that of supersonic speed. His unparalleled sword intent still needed another 5 sets of sword techniques to reach the maximum level before it would undergo a qualitative change. His radiant light sword technique was only 2 levels away from obtaining another special effect. Therefore, when he returned to the academy, he planned to kill his way to the Treja clan after his unparalleled sword intent and radiant light sword technique leveled up. No matter who tried to stop him, he would chop off Kaunitz's head. Chapter 189. Everything was peaceful. Fang Xingjian taught the elite class and the ordinary class martial techniques in the day, and, at night, he would cultivate the radiant light sword technique and the other nurturing techniques. Just as Manny and the others thought that Fang Xingjian was planning to take the big picture into consideration and not take any action, 6 days passed by quickly. Fang Xingjian's radiant light sword technique had finally reached the maximum level of level 20. The other 4 nurturing techniques had also reached the maximum level, and the unparalleled sword intent required a total of 100 sets of sword techniques at the maximum level. The unparalleled sword intent had finally leveled up after dragging on for so long. Fang Xingjian could not wait to look at the new introduction. Unparalleled sword intent apex. Able to instantly break through all physical attacks. The speed at which one learns sword techniques increases once again. Able to learn with a single glance and familiarize oneself with a single practice. If the same sword technique were to fall into your hands, cultivating it over 10 times would be equivalent to cultivating it over 10 years for others. Other than the flaws in the moves, you also understand the weaknesses of all living things. There is nothing that you cannot slash, nothing that you cannot cut. You can gradually use your sword arts to slash through any weapon, including the Empire's divine weapons, inferior divine weapons, superior divine weapons, and divine remains equipment. You can even slash through light and ether particles. Looking at this scene, Fang Xingjian could not help but be slightly dazed, especially when he saw the final level of slashing through light and ether particles. Wouldn't that mean that even electromagnetic waves could be slashed through? If that was the case, being able to slash through all sorts of waves, including visible light, infrared rays and ultraviolet rays, and even ether particles, then, no matter how strong one's reduced force field was, one would be able to slash through it. Even attacks such as high temperature, low temperature, lightning, and gravity waves could be slashed through. Wasn't this the single sword technique? What kind of level would this be? It was a pity that he was only at the level of slashing through Empire's divine weapons. He still needed to continue cultivating his sword arts to reach a higher level. But what kind of sword arts realm would he need to reach in order to be able to slash at a deeper level? There was no explanation for this, and Fang Xingjian could only slowly explore it himself. The Radiant Light Sword technique had reached the maximum level of level 20, and it also had an additional special effect. It could refract sunlight and moonlight, increasing the brightness of the light. Originally, the Radiant Light Sword technique was already like a flash grenade. Now that it could be enhanced by sunlight and moonlight, it was unknown how bright it would be. Feng Xingjian was deep in thought. Right now, he could not see, so if they were to fight, he would use the Radiant Light Sword technique first, then charge up and use the Supreme Mistwind Sword and the high-frequency effulgence weapon to break through the opponent's defense, before finally using the Ether Sword ripples to kill the opponent. The Radiant Light Sword technique, Supreme Mistwind Sword, high-frequency effulgence weapon, Ether Sword ripples. When these four techniques were used together, they would produce a tremendous destructive prowess. Therefore, after completing his preparations, Feng Xingjian held onto the Banshee's Howl and Silver Fox that very night, walking slowly towards Treja's residence. At the same time, in a secret room in the Treja clan, the white-haired Treja clan's clan head sat on a chair, his face as dark as charcoal. Next to him, the pale-faced Countess lay on the bed, his body still wrapped in bandages. He lifted his head and looked at the sky, his eyes filled with confusion and terror. Just then, a servant walked in, looked at the Treja clan's clan head, and said, "Sir, the people we sent to keep an eye on him have yet to find him. It's true that Feng Xingjian has disappeared. He's not in the academy." It turned out that the Treja clan's clan head was worried that Feng Xingjian would seek revenge, so he had sent people to keep an eye on Feng Xingjian's villa. Not in the academy? If not in the academy, then where is he? The Treja clan's clan head frowned, his emotions fluctuating slightly. However, he seemed to have noticed this as well. He controlled himself and said coldly, "He's just a blind man. I don't believe that he can hide anywhere else. Send everyone out to search for him. Even if you have to flip the entire cursed city upside down, you must find him." Hearing Feng Xingjian's name, Countess suddenly trembled and shouted, "Feng Xingjian? What's wrong with him? Is he here to kill me?" How could the current Countess be compared to the high-spirited Countess from 2 months ago? 2 months ago, he was still extremely talented, his sword arts far surpassing those of his age. He had even signed the first prince's devil's note, possessed the bloodline of a human and a dragon, and controlled the divine flames of the Earth's core. With just a tap of his finger, all first transition knights would have to avoid him. His talent, power, and background had brought him endless confidence. However, now that his talent was useless, and a large portion of the tendons in his arms and legs had been severed, and his attributes had dropped below 10 points, terror could not help but descend upon him. It was just like how a person who had 1 billion would gradually become arrogant and domineering. If a person were to go bankrupt, he would not be able to maintain his pride for long. After Countess lost everything, and after a month of torture, he was only left with pain, hatred, despair, and an endless fear of death. Feng Xingjian, that damned Feng Xingjian. He was like an angry patient, throwing out the pillows and blankets on his bed in a fit of rage. With a face filled with fury and fear, he said to the Treja clan's head, "Father, you must stop him. This be asterisk starred. He's capable of doing anything. Where's Jackson? Where's Cursed City Lord? Didn't they guarantee that Feng Xingjian would not come and kill me? Liars, all liars. Enough." The Treja clan's clan head was disturbed by the other party and could not help but glare at Countess, saying, "Shut up. Look at yourself now. Feng Xingjian has only gone missing, but it doesn't mean that he will come to kill you. Moreover, even if he does, I'll protect you. What are you afraid of? Haha, you're finding me a burden now because I've become a cripple? So, in your eyes, I'm just a machine that gives birth. Ha 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 ha. All of you are looking down on me. All of you are letting me down. All of you will regret this. All of you will regret this." Looking at Countess's deranged state, a hint of pain and hatred flashed in the Treja clan's head's eyes. Countess was the son he had gotten in his old age, his only son. He had doted on this son so much, and had placed so much hope on him. Now that he saw Countess in such a state, how could he not be upset? How could he not be in agony? He hated Feng Xingjian for constantly provoking Countess, hated the first prince for burning the bridge after crossing it, and hated Oliver for torturing Countess in prison, turning him into a cripple. Unable to bear to see his son in such a state, he walked out and stood outside, waiting for news. Outside the door, ever since he had received the news that Feng Xingjian had gone missing, he had called for a total of 7 people in the clan, including Xiao Yi and Zhou Yong, who had been studying in the academy. Looking at the 7 knights before him, he felt much more at ease. Although Feng Xingjian might not really come, it's better than being unprepared. Countess is the hope of our clan's bloodline, and we mustn't lose him. An hour passed. 3 hours passed. 6 hours passed. Feng Xingjian seemed to have disappeared like a wisp of smoke. No matter how much the Treja clan's influence tried to find out or search, they could not find any trace of Feng Xingjian. It was as if he had completely disappeared. A bunch of trash. You can't even find a blind man. What use are you guys? The Treja clan's head said coldly, "This won't do. We can't let this go on. Although he's blind, it's only his head-on battle prowess that's weakened. He might not be able to pass the regional selection, and he might not be able to attack from afar, but his speed is still there. If he were to sneak into the manor and launch a sneak attack on us with his unparalleled speed, even I might not be able to fend off his sneak attack. Even if we kill him afterward, what's the use? There's no need to risk our lives against such a person. We've already given the second prince our conditions." The Treja clan's head said, "Quick, go get Curse City Lord and Headmaster Jackson. Tell them to capture Feng Xingjian as soon as possible. Tell them that they must fulfill the conditions we agreed upon when we made the deal back then." After giving these instructions, he looked at the 7 knights beside him, as well as the armor they were wearing. He felt even more at ease. He's already blind, and he hasn't attained heaven's perception. How could he possibly defeat the 8 of us knights head-on? It's impossible for him to attack us head-on. Thinking of this, the Treja clan's head shook his head. In comparison, we still have to be careful of his assassination. From now on, we mustn't let anyone get close to Countess. Then we'll just have to wait for Jackson and the others to capture Feng Xingjian. However, suddenly, cries of shock, the sounds of weapons dropping, bodies falling, buildings collapsing, and all sorts of other sounds rang out from outside the courtyard. All the sounds were linked together, as if they had come out at the same time. This showed how fast the other party's attack was. The Treja clan's head gulped, feeling that the sounds were getting closer and closer. Earlier, they had been several hundred meters away, but now they seemed to be several tens of meters away. When he tried to listen carefully, he realized that it was all quiet, and he could not hear anything at all. The entire Treja clan's courtyard was silent, as if everyone had lost the ability to speak within the span of 10 or so breaths. This was Feng Xingjian openly attacking them head-on. Chapter 190. Feng Xingjian's footsteps landed lightly on the bluestone slabs in front of the door. A slight breeze followed him, encompassing the space within a radius of 100 meters. Even though he was blind, he could still clearly sense the situation within a radius of 100 meters. The scene he had constructed in his mind allowed him to clearly see hundreds or even thousands of apprentices falling to the ground behind him. Some were moaning, some were screaming, and some had even fainted. All of them had been knocked down within a short half a minute. Each of them had been knocked down with a single move, but they had not even been able to see clearly what had knocked them down. Feng Xingjian could also sense that there were 8 powerful knights waiting for him behind the door. Each of their hearts was as powerful as an electric motor, and their fresh blood flowed through their bodies like a great river, bringing them great power and speed. Feng Xingjian could hear their heartbeats and breathing. The wind flowed past their bodies, allowing him to accurately sense their positions, figures, and even the weapons on their waists, backs, and hands. If he were to engage in a battle with these 8 people, once they all started moving at high speed, or even accelerating beyond the speed of sound, it would not be easy for Feng Xingjian to deal with them. Therefore, he did not plan on giving them a chance to speak or attack. The next moment, Boundaries Negation was activated. Right now, Feng Xingjian's speed had reached 10 times that of sound. This was a terrifying speed. If he were to run at full speed, he would be able to cover 3 to 4 kilometers in a second. 1 second was sufficient for him to run 8 rounds around the 400-meter field. In 10 seconds, he would be able to go from Kursk East Gate to the West Gate. 100 seconds was sufficient for him to run from Shanghai to Nanjing. What kind of terrifying speed did this represent? Even most conferred knights below level 25 would not be able to reach such a speed. Therefore, in this 1 second, it was sufficient for him to defeat 8 knights. Fang Xingjian, who was traveling at 10 times the speed of sound, felt as if time had slowed down around him. The air was as viscous as glue. He lifted one hand and retreated toward the door in front of him. He felt the resistance getting stronger and stronger. At the same time, a burning sensation came from his hand. It was the heat caused by the friction between the air, and his entire palm turned red. Then he felt a gentle push on the door, and the entire door suddenly flew up. Then, like a movie playing in slow motion, it flew inch by inch towards the courtyard. Taking a step forward, Fang Xingjian arrived at the courtyard. The 8 knights remained motionless. Their expressions remained unchanged. The entire space was silent because no sound could travel at all. Under the high-speed friction with the air, his body kept on being heated up, and the surrounding air was also heating up rapidly. He felt as if he was strolling leisurely up to a middle-aged knight and punching him lightly in the stomach. The middle-aged knight, who had been hit, was suddenly sent flying. Then, in midair, he slowly slammed into the wall inch by inch. His expression did not change in the slightest, remaining the same as it had been a second ago. Then, Fang Xingjian appeared before Xiao Yi and kicked him in the chin. His teeth, blood, and saliva splattered out inch by inch in the air, and Xiao Yi was also sent flying in slow motion. Then, it was the next night. All 8 knights, including the Treja clan's clan head, were sent flying in slow motion by Fang Xingjian. The next moment, he stopped using boundaries negation, and, at this moment, only 1 second had passed. Boom, 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 boom. Bang, 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 bang. In the instant that time seemed to have returned to normal, the series of sonic booms caused by Fang Xingjian's actions at 10 times the speed of sound were like 100 bombs exploding in the courtyard at the same time. Strong gales, air currents, and white fog spread out crazily. The 8 knights let out agonizing cries as they were sent flying. Like 8 bulldozers, each of them smashed through 5 to 6 walls before finally falling into a pile of rubble. The Treja clan's clan head stood up with great difficulty, trembling as he stared in Fang Xingjian's direction. Large areas of white fog surrounded Fang Xingjian, spurting out incessantly like water vapor. That was the air friction at 10 times the speed of sound, causing Fang Xingjian's body to be heated up incessantly, as if he was a meteorite that had broken through the atmosphere. Fang Xingjian walked out from the white fog step by step, his entire body glowing with a faint red light. There was still a large amount of perspiration and white fog seeping out from his skin, and there were even some faint signs of burns. As expected, under high-speed movements, the requirement for one's body's toughness is getting higher and higher. Even if I have boundaries negation as my foundation and am free from the restrictions of the other attributes, just the high temperature from air friction alone would be enough to cook me if I were to continue moving at the highest speed. Knights were humans as well. As long as they had not gone through the second transition and had not stepped into the divine level, they would still be made of flesh and blood and would have unavoidable flaws. At the same time, in Kaunitz's room, he shouted out uneasily, "Father? Father, are you there? What's going on? Why are there explosions? Is Fang Xingjian here?" His voice was filled with helplessness and fear, as if he was a young puppy crying out alone in the dark. Hearing his son's voice, the Treja clan's clan head looked in Fang Xingjian's direction. The Treja clan's clan head looked at Fang Xingjian, who seemed to be burning up, and then at the manor, which was in a state of devastation, as if it had been plowed by a bomber plane. He clenched his teeth and said, "Fang Xingjian, must you be so ruthless? Kaunitz is already a cripple. Why do you have to make things difficult for him? The reason why I'm killing him has nothing to do with whether he's a cripple or not. It's because I want to kill him. Fang Xingjian tilted his head and looked in the direction of Countess's room, his face brimming with killing intent. The Treja clan's clan head shouted, Fang Xingjian, if you kill Countess, you'll be destroying the entire Treja clan's lineage. If you want to kill, then kill my entire clan, all of my clansmen, and 3,000 servants. How could Fang Xingjian possibly care about him? For someone with a will as strong as steel, once he wanted to kill someone, then even if an army of thousands of men and horses, the world overturned, or even rivers of blood flowed, they would not be able to change his mind in the slightest. Watching him walk towards the room, the Treja clan's clan head bellowed, Fang Xingjian, if you kill Countess, my younger brother will definitely not side with the second prince. From then on, the first prince will have the upper hand. In the future, the people in the world will be plunged into misery and suffering. Won't you blame yourself? Don't worry, such a thing won't happen. Because within 4 years, I'll definitely kill the first prince. If you don't wish for your younger brother to be killed by me in the future, then advise him not to side with the first prince. Otherwise, when I kill people in the future, I won't care if it's because I have no other choice. Chapter 191. Just as Fang Xingjian was talking and walking towards Countess's room, Headmaster Jackson finally could not take it anymore and appeared at the main door. Enough, Xingjian. Do you really want to make a big deal out of this? Jackson looked at everything with an indifferent expression, but he was secretly astonished at the speed of Fang Xingjian's growth. Even with the naked eye, I was unable to see the kill in that 1 second. Right now, if Fang Xingjian did not enter my reduced force field, I probably would not be able to see his movements clearly. 10 times that of supersonic speed was a speed that could no longer be seen by the naked eye. Even if Jackson was at second transition level 26, he would not be able to break through such physical limitations. However, if it was within the reduced force field, then he would be able to see Fang Xingjian's movements clearly. It was because no matter how fast Fang Xingjian's speed was, it would be impossible for him to be faster than the transmission speed of ether particles. That was similar to electromagnetic waves, transmitting at the speed of light. Moreover, Headmaster Jackson's second transition job, the Tyrant Fist of the Azure Skies, had a reduced force field domain that spanned 300 meters. This meant that within 300 meters, all phenomena were clearly visible to him. Therefore, the moment he stepped through the door, he already had a good grasp of the situation within 300 meters around him. Therefore, in the next moment, his countenance changed, and he dashed out. Accompanied by a long whistle and shock waves, he dashed into Countess's room. Countess, who had been lying on the bed, had long since disappeared. There was only a large hole in the middle of the bedroom. Clearly, the weakened Countess had been abducted. Treja clan's clan head looked at Headmaster Jackson's state and panicked, stumbling over. When he saw the scene in the room, he was taken aback. What's going on? Where did Countess go? It can't be that you guys really thought that I didn't do anything while I was missing, right? When Fang Xingjian saw the two of them looking over, he took a step and instantly retreated over 300 meters away. This was outside of Jackson's reduced force field. His eyelids drooped as he held the Banshee's howl in one hand. He was like a dancer in the night, as if he could disappear from your sight at any moment. Jackson knew that this was because Fang Xingjian's speed and movement technique had reached the limit. Even before he moved, his will had already moved, which was why he gave others the feeling that he was moving, but not moving, as if he could disappear at any time. But what he cared about was not this, but what Fang Xingjian had just said. This meant that the big hole under Countess's room was dug by Fang Xingjian. It turned out that Fang Xingjian had long since thought that Jackson and the others would protect Countess. If they were to openly protect him, he would dash out from the tunnel and release several hundred streams of ether sword ripples at one go, using the ether sword ripples that were 10 times that of supersonic speed to slash Countess in a meat paste. If this were to happen, the conflict between him and the second prince would naturally intensify, and he would have to flee at full speed. If it was another situation where none of the conferred knights went to protect Countess due to their statuses, then he would step out to attract everyone's attention. He would then get Robert and Anthony to dash into the room through the tunnel and kidnap Kaunitz in one go. With this, he would not be able to kill Kaunitz in front of everyone. Even if they knew that Kaunitz was doomed, the conflict would not erupt immediately. This was the best situation for Feng Xingjian. Otherwise, if he were to kill Kaunitz in front of everyone, he would end up forming a huge feud with all the conferred knights. Although Feng Xingjian had a strong murderous nature, he was not a fool. If he were to be bold but not astute, unable to even differentiate between foolishness and bravery, how would he have been able to complete the first transition, comprehend ether particles, and cultivate over 100 sets of sword techniques? Although Jackson was not able to completely guess Feng Xingjian's method, he had already guessed most of it. He looked at the big hole under his feet and said, to be able to silently dig out such a big hole within a few hours. Xingjian, it seems that your sword arts have improved by leaps and bounds again. Feng Xingjian did not say a word. With a level 9 divine weapon like the Demon's Howl in his hands and the augmentation from the unparalleled sword intent, which allowed him to slash through the Empire's divine weapons, it was too easy for him to cut through the ground and silently dig out a tunnel within a few hours. However, Jackson continued, even so, the tunnel you've dug is definitely not long. If I were to dash out at my speed, I should still be able to find Kaunitz, right? Feng Xingjian smiled. If Headmaster leaves, then I can only go on a killing spree and kill all 8 of the Treja clan's knights. Jackson's eyes narrowed, as if he wanted to know if what Feng Xingjian had said was true or not. At the same time, he began to calculate in his heart. If what Feng Xingjian said was true, then the 8 knights being killed would have an extremely negative impact. Since when had so many knights died in such a short period of time when there was no war? Not only would the deputy commander Adri have to side with the first prince, even the king would be dissatisfied with the situation here and might even doubt the governor's and the second prince's ability to control the situation. And if it was just Kaunitz who had gone missing, it would just be a commoner who had gone missing. In comparison, it would be much easier than the death of 8 knights. However, the problem was whether Feng Xingjian would dare to do so. Of course, there was another way to resolve this. Jackson's body trembled slightly, and at the next moment, the air exploded. Ripples that could be seen by the naked eye spread out from his body. Then I'll first subdue you, then look for Kaunitz. At the next moment, a loud bang rang out. No one had seen when Jackson had dashed out 100 meters away, but Feng Xingjian had been sent flying, spitting out a large mouthful of blood. However, the 1 second between the punches had given Feng Xingjian enough time to react. Boundaries negation activated, radiant light, sword technique. At 10 times that of supersonic speed, the Demon's Howl in Feng Xingjian's hands cut through the air, releasing a sound that could drive one crazy. At the same time, the radiant light sword technique was activated at full power. Under the full activation of the level 20 radiant light sword technique, Feng Xingjian had turned into a man of light. White light shot out from him, making him look like a small sun that had fallen into the ground. Almost half of the people in Cursed could see the white light shooting up into the sky. It was as if the entire Treja clan had been transformed from night to day. The sudden stimulation from the white light caused the Treja clan's clan head and the other knights who were looking in Feng Xingjian's direction to let out agonizing cries, covering their eyes as they retreated. They had been temporarily blinded. Although Headmaster Jackson was at second transition level 26, he was still unable to break free from the limitations of his mortal body. He could not help but close his eyes, tears flowing out from the corners of his eyes. However, even if he did not rely on his naked eyes, he could still sense everything within a radius of 300 meters with his heaven's perception. Of course, this included light. 300 meters away, he dashed out toward the ball of light. However, he realized that although Feng Xingjian could not see him, he had already dashed out the moment Feng Xingjian activated the radiant light sword technique. With Feng Xingjian's boundaries negation maintaining a speed of 10 times that of supersonic speed, Jackson was unable to catch up to him within 300 meters. The distance between them was even increasing bit by bit. In the short span of over 10 seconds, the two of them, one fleeing and the other chasing, their surroundings changing rapidly until they arrived in the wilderness, which was over 50 kilometers away. Along the way, countless people were temporarily blinded by the piercing white light. There were also many who were enraged by the sound of the demoness howl, only calming down after over 10 minutes. After chasing for over 50 kilometers, Jackson saw that Feng Xingjian was getting further and further away. Finally, he threw out a punch. However, as his opponent was already over 300 meters away, the force of his punch was unable to hit him directly. Amidst a huge explosion in the air, Feng Xingjian was sent flying once again. At the same time, he made use of the force of the explosion to increase his speed once again, dashing into the forest. Just as he entered the forest, the white light was extinguished, completely disappearing from Jackson's senses. Chapter 192. Absolute light brought with it absolute darkness. Faced with Feng Xingjian's level 20 radiant light sword technique, even Jackson could forget about opening his eyes. His eyes were being harassed by the radiant light sword technique, and his ears were being attacked by the demoness howl. Both his sight and hearing were no longer able to capture Feng Xingjian's movements. He could only rely on his heaven's perception to sense and battle, and this made him feel slightly unaccustomed. It was precisely this slight unfamiliarity and the fact that Feng Xingjian had already gotten used to living and battling in the dark. This slight difference allowed Feng Xingjian to escape for over 10 seconds, escaping tens of kilometers away. Despite this, the outcome of the battle was still unknown. However, Jackson stopped and looked quietly in the direction where Feng Xingjian had disappeared. He looked at his hands and sighed. "My old friend, if this is the case, you won't blame me when you come back, right?" In the shadows, Feng Xingjian spat out a mouthful of blood. Even though Jackson had not gone all out, the attack that had brushed past his body had still caused him to suffer internal injuries. However, with internal healing, internal training, and his elementary berserkness physique, his injuries started to heal bit by bit very quickly. He paused for a moment. Although he had not fully recovered, it did not affect his movements. He then headed for the place they had agreed on. Like a cool breeze brushing past the night sky, Feng Xingjian quickly followed cursed alleys and arrived at an underground sewer. He had only gotten this idea after seeing the black market the other time. In the pitch-black sewer, Robert and Anthony were waiting anxiously. Next to them was Kaunitz, who was tied up like a dumpling. Kaunitz's face was pale and filled with fear. The fear of death was like a hand grabbing onto his heart, causing his expression to turn increasingly grim. When he saw Feng Xingjian appear before him, he struggled intensely, and the flesh on his face trembled incessantly. It was as if he had seen a ghost from the legends. Feng Xingjian did not look at Kaunitz for long. Through his senses and hearing, he could tell that Robert and Anthony were both very nervous, even a little afraid. It was obvious that they were feeling a sense of fear and unease towards the future after what they had done today. Feng Xingjian knew that if he didn't do anything, these two people might cause trouble. Sensing Kaunitz's condition, Feng Xingjian's heart suddenly surged with a kind of desire. It was a secret that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time, resulting in a kind of pressure. It was also a shackle to his soul and a shadow in his consciousness. Feng Xingjian suddenly felt that if he could remove this layer of pressure, his mind would be freer. Today was a good opportunity. He suddenly smiled and said, "Kaunitz, do you know why you lost?" Kaunitz kept struggling and whimpering, but his mouth was gagged, and he couldn't say anything. Feng Xingjian thought nothing of it. He suddenly took a step back and started to perform a set of sword techniques. It was the Trija clan's descent of holy light. After performing this set of sword techniques, he performed the Silver Moon Prayer sword technique. After that, he continued to perform the same set of sword techniques. After performing all of the Trija clan's sword techniques, Feng Xingjian then went on to perform over 30 sets of sword techniques from the other clans and sections. His performance speed was very fast, and he would usually only show the best few moves of a set of sword techniques. At the start, Kaunitz continued to struggle, completely ignoring Fang Xingjian sword techniques. However, slowly, his eyes became very round, as if he was looking at the sun rising from the west. He looked at Fang Xingjian, his eyes filled with disbelief. Although Robert and Anthony did not cultivate sword arts, they could understand what Fang Xingjian had just done. He had actually learned over 30 sets of sword techniques by himself. How is this possible? Looking at the trio's astonished expressions, Fang Xingjian said calmly, "Do you understand now, Countess? There's only one reason why you failed. You found the wrong opponent. My talent in sword arts is the best in the world. It's not just that I've learned all of Treja's sword techniques. In this world, no matter what sword technique or move it is, as long as it's placed before me, I'll be able to pick it up and master it. It's not just you. In less than a year or two, I'll completely surpass the first prince, chop off his head, and let him accompany you." Just as Fang Xingjian said these words, Countess's countenance turned ashen, his eyes filled with unwillingness, despair, and regret. Why? Why is there someone like Fang Xingjian in this world? Why is there someone like you in this world? Of course, Fang Xingjian was not interested in listening to his inner monologue, nor did he want to take off the cloth to listen to his long-winded ramblings. He just pierced through Countess's heart and body. He sensed Anthony and Robert, who were next to him, and discovered that their heartbeats and blood flow had slowed down. The two of them were no longer as afraid and nervous as before. Instead, they looked at Fang Xingjian with slight agitation and asked, "Xingjian, is what you said earlier true? Your talent, is that amazing? But how is this possible? There's never been such a person in this world before." "Now there is," Fang Xingjian said. "When you guys go back later, just pretend that nothing has happened." After revealing a portion of his talent and appeasing Anthony and Robert, Fang Xingjian said, "All right, I'll be leaving." After revealing his talent and then killing Countess with a single sword attack, Fang Xingjian felt a sense of relief in his chest. One was that a secret that he had kept in his heart for a long time had been revealed, dispelling the shadow that had been shrouding his heart for a very long time. The other was that Countess, who had been in a tangle with him for almost a year, had finally been killed by him easily. A sense of relief and tranquility welled up in his heart. He could feel that his mental cultivation method was starting to achieve a breakthrough. He let out a deep breath, as if he had exhaled all the troubles in his heart. Mental cultivation method, universal sword dominance lunisolar, had achieved a breakthrough, rising from level 3 to level 4. The ether sword ripples had also increased from 5 times his strength to 2 times his strength. As his mental cultivation method started to achieve a breakthrough, there seemed to be many indistinct things gushing toward him in the air, as if they would gush into his brain at any moment. Through the continuous exchange of information regarding heaven's perception with Manny, through the experience a level 25 confer Night Skull, through today's revelation of his secret to release his body and mind, and through killing Countess, he had fulfilled another wish. Relying on his unrivaled talent and determination, Fang Xingjian had finally obtained a hint of inspiration regarding heaven's perception. He could sense that as long as he continued to polish his spirit, he would truly be able to step into this realm and start to advance in the direction of transcending mortality and entering sainthood. His voice also seemed to become ethereal, slowly entering Anthony's and Robert's ears. "The matter in Cursed has come to an end. I've already obtained the true opportunity to attain heaven's perception. Now, I'm going to stay far away from people and society. I'm going to polish my spirit bit by bit in absolute peace. I'll be back before the regional selection. By then, I'll definitely have attained heaven's perception. You guys stay in Cursed and don't do anything unnecessary. As for the tuition fees for the classes, help me arrange for a refund." By the time he said the last 2 words, Fang Xingjian's voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Before Anthony and Robert, Fang Xingjian's silhouette slowly dissipated, eventually disappearing. Fang Xingjian's departure was like a stone sinking into the ocean. There was no more news from Cursed, and they were completely immersed in various comprehensions. Chapter 193. Fang Xingjian left Cursed City with a silver fox, a demoness howl, and 300 magic power beans. He had already tried the magic power beans. 3 magic power beans a day was more or less enough to replenish the depletion from his cultivation. It would be enough for him to use them until the regional selection. Therefore, he wore an ordinary short-sleeved shirt and walked on with his feet firmly on the ground. In just over half an hour, he arrived in the deep mountains and forests, far away from the crowds, the smoke of war, and all sorts of worldly affairs. Fang Xingjian pursued absolute tranquility in order to comprehend that hint of inspiration in his heart. At the start, Fang Xingjian was not used to the fact that there was no one to cook, no one to wash his clothes, no clean rooms, and no bright lights. However, he could only walk alone in the forest, feeling the humidity in the air, the muddy ground, and the dirty and messy forest. Every step he took, his physical body was cultivating his sword arts, and his mind was trying to grasp that hint of inspiration from heaven's perception. When he was hungry, he would eat the magic power beans. When he was thirsty, he would look for a stream to drink. When he was tired, he would sit down and rest. Sometimes he would look at the sky. Sometimes he would look at the rivers and streams in the valley. And sometimes he would look at the mountains in the distance. Gradually, from the discomfort, and dirty and messy feeling he had when he first came to the forest, he started to feel a sense of tranquility, and freshness. A beard started to grow on his face, and his untrimmed hair was covered in dirt and split ends. His clothes became more and more tattered, and he looked more and more dirty. However, his spirit became purer and purer. The various messy things that he had encountered in the city were gradually brushed away like dust from his heart. He felt that he was becoming more and more tranquil, as if the surrounding nature was gradually merging together. He listened to the sound of the wind. He could feel that there were insects crawling on the ground several meters below his feet. He could hear birds building their nests on the trees over 10 meters above his head. He could feel the flowers and grass swaying in the wind from tens of meters away. He could sense that there was a small stream emitting abundant water vapor several hundred meters away. The world in front of him seemed to have become clearer, and there seemed to be many more voices beside his ears, telling him the secrets of this world. However, they were always vague, and he could only truly understand them when he was just a little bit away from truly understanding them. Therefore, he continued to head north. His shoes had become tattered, and he simply walked barefoot. His feet were like metal pillars. Trees were broken, grass and stones were crushed, and nothing could leave a mark on them. Unknowingly, he had arrived at a large river. Looking at the river that flowed endlessly like the Yangtze River, Fang Xingjian did not stop at all and directly walked up. His legs streaked across the surface of the river at high speed. He looked like he was walking, but in fact his speed was extremely fast. Because he was fast enough, the tension of the river lifted him up, allowing him to walk on the waves. Following the rows of waves, he crossed the river and walked to the other side of the river. On the ferry by the shore, countless people exclaimed. The old man who was rowing the boat knelt down and shouted, "It's the water god! The water god is here! Water god bless us! Has the water god shown himself?" A bunch of fools, a merchant who was more knowledgeable mumbled, "It should be a knight, but that level 19 knight I saw previously could only swim across. To think that this person can walk on the waves?" However, Fang Xingjian could not be bothered with a bunch of fools who worshipped him as a god. He walked past the riverbank and continued to head north. Regardless of whether it was the forests, mountains, rivers, or swamps, nothing could stop him from advancing. On the mountain path, a group of soldiers from the City Guards Institution were advancing rapidly. The knight in the lead wore a grim expression as he shouted, "Hurry, hurry, hurry! Those bandits are right in front. We must catch up to them." All the soldiers from the City Guards Institution bellowed and wanted to increase their speed. However, just then, maniacal laughter suddenly rang out from the surrounding mountains. "Idiots, you've fallen into an ambush." "What?" The knight shouted in shock and fury. A sky full of arrows rained down from the sky, shooting toward the soldiers from above. The knight activated his reduced force field and naturally ignored the rain of arrows. However, it was not the same for the ordinary soldiers. In that instant, more than half of them died or were injured. The knight let out an enraged bellow and charged forward, but was pushed back by the bandit leader's palm. This bandit leader was also at the first transition. That knight bellowed, "Flame Wolf, are you crazy? I'm going to wipe out your entire Seven Flames Hall." "Huh? You dogs of the Empire, wait till you get out of here alive before saying that. No one will know that you've been killed by us." Just then, a black shadow flashed past, like a black line tearing through the sky, darting over the two groups of people. Then, sonic booms rang out, and a series of loud sounds flashed across the sky as if thunder had struck. Then, under the knight's horrified gaze, over 100 bandits were like fireworks that had been lit up, exploding into clouds of blood missed one after another. Even the bandit leader, who was at the first transition, was no exception, being smashed into over 100 pieces of rotten flesh. Passing through the mountain path in the valley, Feng Xingjian did not stop. His mind was filled with countless sounds, and by the time he regained his senses, he had already arrived at the top of a great snowy mountain. It had already been a month since he had left Curse City. Standing at the peak of the snowy mountain, looking at the majestic snowy peak piercing into the sky, looking at the endless snowy mountain under his feet, with its beautiful branches and jade leaves, a sense of astonishment that he had never experienced before entered Feng Xingjian's heart. The snowy mountain was vast, but it was quiet. In this silence, Feng Xingjian could finally hear the sounds in the air clearly. That was not a real voice. It was the information contained in the ether particles. Temperature, humidity, sunlight, length, height, color. As more and more information from ether particles gushed into Feng Xingjian's brain, the information within 10 meters around him gradually assembled in his brain. In the next second, he could already see the scene within 10 meters of his surroundings in his mind. At this moment, Feng Xingjian had gone through countless hardships and paid an innumerable price. He had finally taken the crucial step and reached the realm of heaven's perception. Countless information that could drive an ordinary person crazy gushed into Feng Xingjian's brain, but was directly accepted by his unrivaled talent and strong will. At the same time, a sixth attribute appeared on his stats window other than strength, agility, endurance, reaction, and flexibility. Ether synchronization rate. 10%. This ether synchronization rate represented how much information he could receive from ether particles. 10% was the threshold for attaining heaven's perception, which meant that 10% of the information was sufficient to form a basic sensory image in his mind. This was similar to the clarity of a photograph. 10% was the most basic. The higher the synchronization rate, the higher the clarity of the photograph. In the end, he would even be able to see the microscopic world and see the various information left behind by others. In the future, he would even be able to see all sorts of invisible light, electromagnetism, sound waves, and other things that could not be seen by the naked eye. It could be said that 10% was just the beginning. As the synchronization rate continued to increase, Feng Xingjian would be able to see the world more and more clearly, just like how the resolution of a photograph would get increasingly higher. Only at this stage would he be able to go through a job transition and level up to level 20. From then on, there would be a threshold for the synchronization rate every 10%. It was just like how one would need 20% to reach level 21 at level 20. Each time he reached 10%, he would be met with a heavenly barrier. It would be like a tremendous flow of information, a disturbance from illusions, and a loss of control over one's emotions and desires. These were the 10 heavenly barriers. At each barrier, there would be conferred knights who would fall, and each barrier was extremely dangerous. However, this might not be the case for Feng Xingjian. For example, he had easily received the information bombardment at the first barrier. It was because his talent was unrivaled. Regardless of whether it was his brain's memory, reaction, willpower, or endurance, they were all outstanding. Looking at the ether synchronization rate on his stats window, Feng Xingjian smiled. He sensed slightly and could sense the over 100 streams of light in his brain. These were over 100 skill seeds. He could finally start synthesizing skills. Chapter 194. Fang Xingjian could not wait to sit down and start preparing to synthesize his skills. Compared to ordinary geniuses who could be proud of having over 10 sets of skills, and those who could shake the world with tens of skills at the maximum level, Fang Xingjian had over 100 sets of skills at the maximum level. First is the nurturing sword techniques, combining all the nurturing sword techniques into one. Thinking of this, Fang Xingjian started considering which nurturing sword technique to use as his main skill. Looking at the School of Sword Art's nurturing sword manuals, and then at Treja's nurturing sword techniques, Fang Xingjian's gaze swept past them one by one, finally landing on his first set of sword techniques, the level 30 basic sword technique. Basic sword technique. From Fang Xingjian's point of view, although this set of basic sword technique, which had been circulated in Demonic City, had average training effects, it indeed lived up to its name. It seemed to contain the most basic and simplest movements of all sword techniques, and was truly the foundation of all sword techniques. He wanted to synthesize skills, to combine over 100 sets of nurturing sword techniques into one. This basic sword technique had a widest range and was the best choice. Therefore, he drew out the skill seed that represented the basic sword technique and found another set of nurturing sword techniques. This was the first set of nurturing sword techniques he had learned, the grizzly bear sword technique. The only use of this set of sword techniques was to provide Fang Xingjian with a few hundred potential points every day, and there were many other nurturing sword techniques that had the same effects as his own. The basic sword technique trained the entire body, although he did not go as deep into each part of the body as other nurturing sword techniques. However, it was undeniable that it had a wider scope and greater potential. Therefore, he did not hesitate to control the grizzly bear sword technique skill seed, pressing it into the basic sword technique skill seed. With a boom, the grizzly bear sword technique skill seed merged into the basic sword technique skill seed like a drop of water. In the next moment, countless pieces of information seemed to intersect and merge in Fang Xingjian's mind. When everything calmed down, the skill seed representing the grizzly bear sword technique had completely disappeared. Fang Xingjian looked at the basic sword technique's introduction, but there were no changes. Did the synthesis fail? He tried to recall, but realized that he had already forgotten about the grizzly bear sword technique. The way he had used the grizzly bear sword technique just now was equivalent to deleting it. When the ether synchronization rate reached 10%, it meant that the success rate of synthesizing skills would be 10%. Therefore, the higher the ether synchronization rate after attaining heaven and man as one, the higher the level of the ether synchronization rate, the higher the success rate of synthesizing, and the stronger and more terrifying the skills would be. In the end, they would reach the level of Huang Lin, Jackson, and even the First Prince. For people like the First Prince who had reached level 29, his ether synchronization rate had already reached 100%, and the synthesis of skills would definitely succeed. All he needed was time to cultivate the skill to the maximum level. It was because only when a skill was at the maximum level would it mean that he was extremely familiar with the skill and had sufficient information about it. Only then would he be able to synthesize it. However, Fang Xingjian wasn't worried about this because he learned his skills very quickly. Even though the grizzly bear sword technique had failed, he did not sigh. Instead, he turned his gaze to the eagle sword technique. Then, with a sweep of his sword fingers, streams of sword chi shot out, slashing at the stone wall at the side, causing the snow and stone fragments to scatter. He slashed out over 10 pictures of human figures waving swords, with annotations beside them. After doing this, Fang Xingjian once again sent the eagle sword technique skill seed toward the basic sword technique skill seed. With a loud boom, the eagle sword technique disappeared, but the basic sword technique still didn't change. The synthesis had failed again. As expected, with a synchronization rate of 10%, my understanding of the information in the ether particles is too rough. The success rate of synthesizing skills is also only 10%. It's too low. The ether synchronization rate represented the amount of information one could obtain from the ether particles in the surroundings. 10% of the information was very high. For example, when gathering information from the environment around one's body, one could only create a rough environment in one's mind. Similarly, the amount of information one could obtain from the ether particles in one's body was only 10%. Therefore, the success rate was very low. Most knights whose synchronization rate was below 50% would usually require a few months or even a few years to bring a set of skills to the maximum level. Of course, they would have to study and synthesize skills with great care and make difficult decisions. However, Feng Xingjian did not have such worries and troubles. It was because he was a fast learner, with the addition of skills and specialties time and time again, as well as the world's #1 sword arts talent. His learning speed had reached an astonishing level. While other people still had to choose carefully or even wait until they were at least level 25 before they had the confidence to start synthesizing skills on a large scale and had to be very careful with each synthesis, Feng Xingjian was already casually synthesizing skills. He looked at the eagle sword technique carved on the stone wall. After scanning through it for about a minute, there was an additional set of Eagle Sword Technique Level 1 on his stats window. Then, without drawing his sword, he used his fingers as a sword and started to practice the Eagle Sword Technique. He was still a little rough with the first sword, but he was already very familiar with the second sword. By the third sword, it was extremely smooth. By the time he reached the 10th sword, the Eagle Sword Technique in his hands was as if he had been practicing it for a few months. Just like that, he practiced the entire set of Eagle Sword Technique from start to finish, and the Eagle Sword Technique was once again at the maximum level of level 30. Feng Xingjian once again slapped the Eagle Sword Technique skill seed onto the basic sword technique. With a loud rumble, this time around, the Eagle Sword Technique disappeared, but the basic sword technique had an additional effect of allowing one to gain a maximum of 800 potential points every day. I've succeeded. The effect of the Eagle Sword Technique has been added onto the basic sword technique. Feng Xingjian smiled and swept out with his sword cheese, plowing away the layer of the stone wall, which had been carved with the sword technique, turning it back into a smooth stone wall. He then started to carve a set of Nurturing Sword Technique, the tenor-style body strengthening sword technique. Therefore, in the days that followed, Feng Xingjian stayed at the peak of the snowy mountain. When he was hungry, he would eat magic beans, and when he was thirsty, he would drink snow water. He started to cultivate and synthesize skills day and night. Compared to others who could only synthesize skills once every few months or years, he could synthesize a skill almost every few minutes. Therefore, after a week, he had already synthesized all the nurturing sword techniques into the basic sword technique, and all the training sword techniques into the 9-headed dragon sword technique. The synthesized 9-headed dragon sword technique was nothing much, as it was just a combination of a few sets of training sword techniques. However, with the tempering method that combined the 5 major attributes, every time he cultivated this new 9-headed dragon sword technique, Feng Xingjian would be able to train any of the attributes he wanted, and his cultivation speed would also increase by 20%. What was amazing was the basic sword technique that had been synthesized from over 100 nurturing sword techniques. He had combined the advantages of all the nurturing sword techniques, and every time he cultivated it, he would be able to nourish every single cell in his body. When he cultivated it, it was as if he was soaking in a hot spring, with every fiber of his being, every piece of his flesh and blood, desperately absorbing the nutrients and energy in his body. Its effect was even higher than the sum of all the nurturing sword techniques. Originally, Feng Xingjian would at most be able to gain 11,000 potential points per day, but now that his physical body was automatically cultivating this new basic sword technique, he could gain 20,000 potential points. This efficiency was too terrifying. This meant that he would be able to increase his reaction attribute by a little every 3 to 4 days. This was also one of the reasons why conferred knights were getting stronger and stronger. Their nurturing techniques would usually go through many syntheses, becoming more and more suitable for their bodies. They would be able to dig out every bit of their body's potential, and their attributes would also grow to a terrifying level. Therefore, Fang Xingjian named this set of sword technique the Rebirth Sword Technique. This set of sword technique lived up to its name, and after cultivating it, it would have the effect of being reborn. Therefore, Fang Xingjian's skills now consisted of the Rebirth Sword Technique and the new Nine-Headed Dragon Sword Technique, as well as the Training Technique. Then there were the two killing techniques, the Supreme Mistwind Sword Technique and the Radiant Light Sword Technique. There was also the Ether Sword Ripples, a technique that had evolved from his reduced force field due to the mutation of his mental cultivation method. With the Nurturing Technique and the Training Technique, there was nothing much left for him to do. Next was the problem of killing techniques. First of all, Fang Xingjian had not learned the Ether Sword Ripples, so he could not possibly throw it out to synthesize. It would be gone if he forgot about it. Now, the problem was how to synthesize the Supreme Mistwind Sword and the Radiant Light Sword Technique. Should he smash the Supreme Mistwind Sword onto the Radiant Light Sword Technique or the Ether Sword Ripples? Or should he smash the Radiant Light Sword Technique onto the Supreme Mistwind Sword or the Ether Sword Ripples? Fang Xingjian furrowed his brows and pondered for a moment. Then he suddenly smiled. The Supreme Mistwind Sword was a sword technique that controlled the atmosphere and was restricted by the limits of the air. In the future, it would not be of much use in second transition battles where one could easily surpass the speed of sound. Therefore, it was not suitable to be his main technique. As for whether he should use the Supreme Mistwind Sword to smash the Radiant Light Sword Technique or the Ether Sword Ripples, that was someone else's problem. To Fang Xingjian, all he had to do was smash them all once. No, it could be more extreme. His plan was to first smash the Radiant Light Sword Technique and the Supreme Mistwind Sword onto the Ether Sword Ripples. After the synthesis was successful, he would then learn the Radiant Light Sword Technique and the Supreme Mistwind Sword, and then smash the Supreme Mistwind Sword onto the Radiant Light Sword Technique. It was his fault for being a fast learner. As for the Ether Divine Arts Effulgence Weapon's special effect, it was only level 1 and could not be used for synthesis yet. Chapter 195. Therefore, Fang Xingjian started to synthesize skills one after another. He first smashed the Supreme Mistwind Sword and the Radiant Light Sword Technique onto the Ether Sword Ripples. After succeeding, he continued smashing the Supreme Mistwind Sword Technique onto the Radiant Light Sword Technique. However, the cultivation of the Supreme Mistwind Sword and the Radiant Light Sword Technique was not as fast as those nurturing sword techniques. Usually, it would take 1 to 2 days for them to reach the maximum level of 30. Therefore, on the snowy mountain, in Fang Xingjian's mind, the skill seeds that represented sword techniques continued to collide with the Ether Sword Ripple's skill seeds. With each collision, countless information would be exchanged, fused, and combined. This made Fang Xingjian feel like he was a human-shaped computer with countless data flowing out like waterfalls in his mind. Just like that, he continued to cultivate sword techniques, synthesize skills, cultivate sword techniques, synthesize skills, and feel the repeated collisions between the skill seeds in his mind. Finally, when there was only half a month left before the regional selection, Fang Xingjian finally succeeded in synthesizing his skills. Other than being able to emit white sword light to confuse the enemy, the new Radiant Light Sword Technique could now also control the air currents to refract sunlight, moonlight, and other light sources to kill the enemy. Holding the Demonis Howl in his hand, Fang Xingjian did not dare to use too much strength to create a shrill sound on the snowy mountain. Therefore, he only swung the sword slowly, and the air currents encompassed the entire longsword. The next moment, a beam of sunlight gathered on the sword, and in that instant, it was reflected by an unknown amount of atmospheric water vapor. With a swoosh, as the sword pierced out, a beam of white light shot out from the tip of the sword, sweeping across the ground like a laser beam. It melted a large amount of snow water, causing white steam to fill the air. It was as if one had been brought from the snowy mountain to a hot spring. It could be refracted to kill the enemy? Fang Xingjian smiled. The speed of light was light speed, and the sword's refraction could create a high temperature of about 1,000 degrees. This new set of sword technique was much stronger than the radiant light sword technique and the supreme mist-wind sword. Moreover, this set of sword technique also maintained the supreme mist-wind sword's ability to control the atmosphere. Fang Xingjian named this set of sword technique the luminous heaven soaring slash. And after the ether sword ripples were infused with the supreme mist-wind sword and the radiant light sword technique, they also experienced a qualitative leap. The new ether sword ripples would still increase one's strength by 50% with each level of mental cultivation method, inheriting the cultivator's highest attack speed. However, at the same time, the ether sword ripples could change their frequency, just like light rays with different frequencies. It developed two special effects, low temperature and high temperature. Looking at the snow-covered land that had turned into a hot spring, Fang Xingjian tapped out with his finger, and over 10 streams of ether sword ripples, which brought with them an eerie chill, swept out. The temperature of the snow water dropped once again, turning it into ice water. Then he sent out over 10 streams of ether sword ripples across space. The surrounding air suddenly became scorching hot, once again raising the temperature of the snow water. Now that the ether sword ripples had the special effects of ice and fire, there was more room for battle. With that, after 2.5 months of cultivation, not only had Fang Xingjian completed his technique synthesis, his attributes had also increased through his daily cultivation. Over 1 million potential points had been allocated to his strength and reaction, and his waves had leveled up once again, reaching level 7. His attributes had also increased once again. Due to this period of peace and the fact that his ether synchronization rate had continued to increase, his mental cultivation method had finally leveled up once again, reaching level 5. Therefore, his attributes had now become name, Fang Xingjian age, 17 occupation, wind shadow, sword divinity level, 19 strength, 68 plus 5 agility, 193 plus 5 reaction, 79 endurance, 51 flexibility, 53 ether synchronization rate. 10% the attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute, skills, Rebirth Sword Technique, New 9-Headed Dragon Sword Technique, Luminous Heaven Soaring Slash, Level 1 Ether Divine Art Specialties, Genius Swordsmanship, Elementary Survival Instinct, Internal Healing, Internal Training, Sword Specialist, Heightened Reflexes, Perfect Muscles, Elementary Berserkness, Unparalleled Sword Intent. Apex Waves Level 7 Sonido, Sword Zephyr Waves Mental Cultivation Method Level 5. Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar. Looking at how his abilities had once again improved by leaps and bounds, Fang Xingjian let out a breath. It's time to prepare to participate in the regional selection. Right now, Fang Xingjian finally had the confidence to participate in the regional selection and get first place, seizing the position of regional champion. At the next moment, Fang Xingjian's silhouette disappeared abruptly, turning into an afterimage as he dashed toward the south, toward the Great Western region, toward the location where the regional selection would be held. The city where the regional academy was located was also the place where countless top-notch characters from the Great Western region were gathered. This included the governor who managed all the knights in the Great Western region, the governor who managed all the knight academies, the regional governor who managed all the government departments, and the marshal who led all the armies in the Great Western region. In the center of the Great Western region, in the Great Western city. A few days later, Fang Xingjian climbed mountains and crossed rivers, cultivating as he made his way to the Great Western City. This city was 3 times bigger than Cursed and had a population of over 500,000 people. It was a great city where countless key departments and top-notch characters from all over the Great Western region were gathered. Sensing the liveliness of the city, Fang Xingjian broke into an excited smile. He would pass the regional selection here and become the regional champion. He would then rise up the ranks and attain the divine level. Finally, he would return to Demonic City and do what he should have done long ago. However, if he wished to participate in the regional selection, he would first have to register. Worried that he would be late for the registration, Fang Xingjian asked for directions as he headed in the direction of the regional selection in the Great Western City. Although the entire Great Western City was crowded and crowded, Fang Xingjian went up to the rooftops and leaped all the way. He would ask for directions when he did not know the way, and finally arrived at the registration place not long after the sky turned dark. He walked in and said to a receptionist, "I'm here to register for the regional selection." Oh. The receptionist was a young lady in her 20s. She wore a uniform and looked very tired. Although she was just an ordinary person, she was not surprised to see Fang Xingjian. It was because in a place like the Great Western City, nights were far too common. Moreover, the place she was at was the registration place. How many nights would have appeared before her? However, she shook her head and said, "You're too late. The registration period has long passed." Fang Xingjian frowned. "Isn't there still 15 days before the regional selection?" The young lady threw him a sideways glance and said unhappily, "The registration period started a month ago and will end half a month before the regional selection. Haven't you heard from the people in your academy?" However, she threw a glance at Fang Xingjian's tattered appearance and said, "Humph, you must have just returned after going out to train hard. Is that why the academy didn't inform you? But there's no other way. You'll have to wait for the next regional selection." How could Fang Xingjian possibly wait for the next regional selection? He frowned and said, "Is there any other way?" "I'm definitely going to participate in this regional selection." The young lady shook her head like a rattle drum. However, she seemed to have finally realized that Fang Xingjian had been talking with his eyes closed. She could not help but say, "Hey, aren't you being too rude by always talking to me with your eyes closed?" Fang Xingjian was stunned for a moment before he said calmly, "I'm blind and can't see anything." The young lady was stunned for a moment before a hint of fury flashed on her face. "Are you kidding me? You're blind and you're still registering for the regional selection? Don't you know that the regional selection requires the Pantheon Monument observation? Why are you registering for it?" Fang Xingjian frowned and said coldly, "I've already attained heaven's perception. Within a 10-meter radius, I can sense things even more clearly than with the naked eye." The young lady was stunned for a moment before she cried out involuntarily, "You've attained heaven's perception? Doesn't that mean you can go through the second transition at any time?" Chapter 196. However, after the young lady finished shouting, she immediately looked at Fang Xingjian in disbelief. She stretched out her hand and waved it in front of his eyes, then suddenly asked, "What color clothes did I wear today?" In Fang Xingjian's heaven's perception, his synchronization rate was at 10%, which meant that he was able to receive the most basic 10% of information. It was mainly information related to vision and hearing. It could basically allow one to have clearer senses than seeing, and, of course, it could also allow him to clearly see the situation within 10 meters around him. As for the area beyond 10 meters, Fang Xingjian continued to sense things through the wind and sound, just like in the past. He said calmly, "A blue short-sleeved uniform with blue pants." The young lady was surprised for a moment, then once again waved her hand in front of Fang Xingjian. "Are you really blind?" Suddenly, she thought of how if he had attained heaven's perception, he would be able to sense what she was doing. She immediately stuck out her tongue and said, "Wait here, I'll go ask the leader." With that, she jogged off, heaven's perception. To think that there's another knight who has attained heaven's perception this year. And he's so young? Hearing the young lady's voice, the staff in the surroundings all looked over, looking at Fang Xingjian in astonishment and curiosity. Not long later, the sound of footsteps rang out, and a sweaty fatso walked over. When he saw Fang Xingjian, he shouted, "You said that you've attained heaven's perception?" Fang Xingjian could clearly sense that although the other party looked very ordinary, his strong muscles and powerful heart showed how strong he was. This fatso was a first transition knight. The young lady followed behind Fatso and shouted, "That's him! That's him!" Fatso placed his hands behind his back and asked, "How many on my hands?" Fang Xingjian could clearly sense that the other party's hands, which were hidden behind his back, had formed the shape of 11. He said calmly, 11. It's really heaven's perception. Fatso was still a little speechless. He looked at Feng Xingjian in astonishment and said, How old are you? Which academy are you from? Why did you sign up so late? 17 years old, Cursed Royal Academy. My name is Feng Xingjian. Oh, yeah, that Feng Xingjian. You transitioned to a Windstorm Sword hero and killed a level 20 Garcia's destined warrior. It's a pity that you're blind now. Feng Xingjian did not expect the other party to have heard of his name. Fatso said, My name is Valen, and I'm in charge of the registration for this year's regional selection. Sai, why did you only register now? You're already late. Aren't you a little too ambitious? He said with a pained expression. If you're late for the registration, you won't be able to participate in the regional selection. At the very least, I don't have this authority. Sai, tonight is the 100-flower banquet, and the contents of the competition are going to be announced. You definitely can't register here. How about this? Follow me to meet Governor Devitt. He's in charge of the selection and assessment of all knights and conferred knights in the entire Great Western region. Only he has the authority to let you participate now. As he spoke, his eyes were filled with pity and anxiety, as if he was even more anxious than Feng Xingjian himself. Where's the governor? Feng Xingjian asked. Fatso and Valen said, Today is the day the governor's wife is hosting the 100-flower banquet, inviting the various geniuses from the 12 regional academies. The governor and his wife must be in the manor now. Come, let's go look for them. As Fatso and Valen spoke, they had already dragged Feng Xingjian out. In an extremely huge manor located in the eastern suburbs of the Great Western City, it was currently filled with fireworks. Lights filled the entire mountains and plains, and there was an endless stream of horses and carriages at the entrance. There were gorgeously dressed young aristocratic ladies and handsome aristocratic young men everywhere. There were also some knights with oily faces, tall statures, or skinny statures. This was the day the governor's wife, Madame Hathaway, would host the 100-flower banquet. It was also the banquet where the current geniuses would be gathered before each regional selection. Look, that's Lord Delen from the regional secretariat. Look, that's Lord Feng Erluin from the regional finance department. A young lady then pointed to a young man who was slowly walking down from the horse carriage. He was completely covered in black long robes, with only one of his eyes revealed, and said, Look, that's Anderson from the South Mountain Academy. He's that Anderson? The first person in the Empire to transition into the Shadow Death God? That's right. Who would have thought that the South Mountain Academy would have hidden him for so long? The Shadow Death God. That's something that only someone from the previous kingdom had succeeded in transitioning into. If it wasn't because the temptation of this regional selection was too great, they would probably have continued hiding him until Anderson was fully prepared. His preparations are almost done. I heard that this Anderson has been in the first transition for 5 years. He has never used a second move against a knight before, and he's one of the hot favorites to become the champion this year. The young man, Anderson, seemed to have heard their conversation and glared at them coldly. The few people who were conversing felt their bodies turn cold, as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Amazing, amazing. Is this the Shadow Death God? To think that I can't move after just one glare. The few young ladies watched as Anderson left and immediately started chattering. The next moment, another wave of commotion rang out, as if another important character had arrived. All of a sudden, the sky was filled with flower petals, as if it was raining flowers. Then, amidst the fragrance, the crowd dispersed. A young man in white clothes and pants, with an unbelievably exquisite face and figure, slowly walked over. He looked like a god who had descended from the heavens to the mortal world. So handsome. Next to the young lady, another aristocratic lady shouted, That must be the astral ancestor's third-generation disciple, Holt. It's said that he's also participating in the regional selection this time around. The third-generation disciple of a divine-level expert, which meant that he was the disciple of the astral ancestor's disciple. This was a very dazzling identity. And this divine-level expert's name was also very interesting, astral ancestor. However, everyone knew that there were no stars in Miracle World. Only some clans with ancient legacies would know that a very, very long time ago, there had been stars in Miracle World. However, for some unknown reason, they had all suddenly disappeared. Therefore, the name Astral Ancestor contained a hint of an ancient secret representing a very, very long legacy. All the aristocratic ladies present immediately looked toward Holt, as if they were wolves who had seen their prey. Among the crowd, Cursed Royal Academy's Rhoda mumbled, "Legend has it that all the Astral Ancestors' disciples must be handsome men and beautiful women. Those whose appearances and figures are slightly out of shape will be chased out of the sect. It seems that it's true." Manny laughed out loud and said, "Is that true? To think that there's such a thing." Ralph and Hamill turned their heads as well, as if this was the first time they had heard such gossip. However, the vice headmaster, Edger, who was leading the group, immediately criticized, "Shut up. This is the great western city, not a small place like Cursed. You guys must be mindful of your image and not speak carelessly. You'll be throwing Cursed face." Glaring fiercely at the few of them, Edger's brows furrowed again. This year's regional selection is really filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. To think that all the powerful characters have come out. Just then, a commotion broke out in the direction of the entrance once again, gathering toward that direction like a tidal wave. "What's wrong? What's going on?" Edger asked the people next to him what was going on. A knight said excitedly, "It's Master Llewellyn. Lord Holy Orzin's first disciple, Master Llewellyn, is here." Under the astonished gazes of Edger and the others, a middle-aged man dressed in white robes with a calm expression, who looked no different from any monk in a church, walked out slowly. At the same time, in the direction of the manor's hall, a silhouette flew past at high speed. It was Governor Devitt, who had come out to welcome him. Many spatial gaps were left in the sky as Governor Devitt appeared before Llewellyn in a flash, laughing as he gave him a hug. "Old friend, why have you come as well? Could it be that you're thinking of participating in the regional selection?" Devitt joked, but he knew that it was impossible for this second transition level 29 expert to participate in the regional selection. The reason why Devitt had come out to welcome him was not because of Llewellyn's status, but because he represented the Holy Orizin, representing the prestige of a divine level expert. "Lord Devitt, you're still as vigorous as ever." Llewellyn smiled and said softly, "As for me, I'm only here to look for someone." Chapter 197. Although Master Llewellyn's voice was not loud, he did not have the intention to hide it. Therefore, many knights present heard what he said. Therefore, after Devitt led Llewellyn in, the news that Master Llewellyn was here to look for someone spread out rapidly. Look for someone? Edger was stunned. He suddenly recalled that over 3 months ago, Huang Lin had gone to the Sacred Mountain to look for the Holy Orizin to treat Feng Xingjian. Back then, they had not thought that a divine-level expert would come out of seclusion for Feng Xingjian. However, the Holy Orizin's eldest disciple had come to the great western city, saying that he was looking for someone. Rhoda let out a soft gasp and said, "Could it be that he's here to look for Feng Xingjian?" Edger was the first to deny it. "What kind of joke is this? What kind of status does Lord Holy Orizin have? He's an existence who can affect the entire empire situation with a single word. How could he possibly come out of seclusion to treat Feng Xingjian? Moreover, if he's looking for Feng Xingjian, he shouldn't have come to the great western city. Feng Xingjian has long since escaped to God knows where. Do you guys think that he'll come to participate in the regional selection? It's just a coincidence. Stop making wild guesses." Edger did not believe that Llewellyn was here to look for Feng Xingjian. He led Rhoda, Hamill, and Ralph to the manor's hall. As for Manny, he could not be bothered with Edger and left on his own. Edger looked at the 3 genius students under him and reminded them again and again, "Remember, don't forget the aristocratic etiquette that I've taught you guys. Otherwise, it's a small matter if you embarrass yourselves, but it's a big matter if you embarrass the academy. You might not even get to see such a grand scene in your entire lives. You must be careful." under Edgar's lead. The three of them walked cautiously toward the manor's hall, feeling as if they were country bumpkins entering the city. On the way, they saw that the path was paved with white jade, and on both sides of the path were lampposts with golden edges. There were over 100 lamps, illuminating the entire place as if it was daytime. There was also some kind of medicine added to the longevity lantern, which gave off a refreshing fragrance. Just smelling it would make one feel refreshed, and even their blood and chi would feel warm. This extremely extravagant style of a rich and powerful family caused the three of them to unknowingly become restrained. When had they ever seen such an imposing manor? Just the cost of building this section of the walkway would be enough to buy their entire family. Even Edgar, who was leading the team, became even more cautious. He lowered his head, not daring to look around. At this moment, another horse carriage stopped at the entrance. Cursed City Lord alighted from the carriage, dressed in formal attire. Following behind him was Lilia, who was dressed in an evening gown. The evening gown revealed a large area of snow-white skin on her chest and back. The lace at the sides of her dress and the little hat on her head made her look playful yet pure. Although her arms and legs were a little bulkier, when paired with Lilia's sweet face, she appeared even more lively and adorable. However, there was a hint of reluctance on her face. Cursed City Lord said softly, "All right, Lily, don't throw a tantrum. Today is the day where the geniuses from the various academies gather. Later on, you should get to know the others and make friends." "Not interested," Lilia said coldly. "I'm not interested in talking to them." Cursed City Lord shook his head helplessly. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he pointed to a man with white hair and a white beard, who looked extremely old and gloomy as he walked towards the hall. He said, "Look at that. That's Wei Lung, the guy who has awakened heaven's perception at the first transition." Wei Lung's name had been extremely popular in the great western city for the past half a month. It was because he had awakened heaven's perception on his own before the first transition. His story was very simple, but also very sorrowful. For the past 10 years or so, Wei Lung had lived an ordinary life. He had learned martial arts like an ordinary knight, cultivated like an ordinary knight, found the daughter of a small aristocratic family, got married, and had children. Then, he had lived an ordinary life. Other than the fact that he loved his daughter and his family very much, he had not revealed anything special about him. Until that day 1 month ago, when he had returned home, he had discovered that his wife, his daughter, and his parents had all died in a fire. That night, his hair had turned white, and he seemed to have aged 20 years. It was also that night that he had unexpectedly entered the realm that he had dreamed of, heaven's perception. Cursed City Lord shook his head in pity. How tragic. But to be able to comprehend heaven's perception without the help of resources before the first transition. He's indeed a talent. It's just that he hasn't been able to be unearthed in the past. He, that brat who transitioned into a shadow death god, and the astral ancestor's grand disciple. The three of them are now the most popular contenders for this year's regional selection. Lilia's lips twitched, but Fang Xingjian's image appeared in her heart. Cursed City Lord looked at the sorrowful look on Lilia's face and felt helpless. In order to make Lilia forget about Fang Xingjian, he had specially brought her here. Fang Xingjian had lost his sight and then disappeared after kidnapping Countess. Without the Academy's support, and with no background, no one thought highly of his future. The father-daughter duo did not speak a word as they walked into the manor's main hall. They saw that the ceiling was filled with 4 to 5 meter long chandeliers, and up to 100 maids walking around, preparing food and drinks for each guest. Cursed City Lord suddenly smiled and shouted, "Haha, David, long time no see. You're getting more and more handsome. Uncle, you're the one. You feel like you've always been 30 years old." What a handsome man with an elegant demeanor. The person who had spoken was a young knight with a head of blonde hair combed to the back. He wore a knight's attire, and his eyes were like the ocean. He was the second son of Mongol City's City Lord, and was a family friend of Cursed City Lord. Cursed City Lord broke into a satisfied smile when he saw him. You're also participating in the regional selection this time around? That's right. I probably won't be able to get into the top 3, but I'd still like to fight for the top 5. His words sounded humble, but the confidence and high spirits on his face were obvious. His eyes turned in Lilia's direction, smiling as he greeted her. You must be Lilia? I remember that we used to play together when we were young. Seeing that Lilia did not say anything, Cursed City Lord smiled, raised his wine cup, and left. I'll go greet a few acquaintances. It's Lilia's first time in the great western city. David, help me take good care of her. Don't worry, uncle. David smiled as he watched Cursed City Lord leave. He then said to Lilia, your father has the intention of matchmaking us, but you don't have to be so averse to it. Do I look that ugly? Lilia rolled her eyes at him and said, don't talk to me, or else I'll call you molester. With that, she turned and left. David smiled and shook his head. Looking at Lilia's back view, he revealed an even more interested expression. He felt that this girl was very natural and not pretentious, different from those coquettish be-asterisk cheese he had met in the past. Therefore, he chased after her. Elsewhere, under Fatso and Valen's lead, Fong Xingjian finally arrived at the manor's entrance. Valen said to the guard, we have something very important to discuss with Governor Devitt. The guard shook his head and said, the Hunter Blossom Banquet is being held today. Unless you have an invitation, no one is allowed to enter. As he said this, he looked at Valen and Fong Xingjian in contempt, clearly treating them as people who were trying to sneak in. Chapter 198. Valen said furiously, it's really something very important. The guard's lips twitched as he smiled and said to the ladies who were dressed up beautifully and would stick to aristocrats the moment they got off the carriage, they also have something very important to attend to. Those ladies were clearly waiting outside the gate, looking for a chance to sneak in and find a rich husband. The guard had obviously treated them as such. F***ck Valen was enraged. He raised his fist as if he was going to beat up the guard. However, seeing the guard's disdainful gaze and fearless expression, he eventually stomped his feet and did not do anything. Although the other party was just an ordinary person, he was the governor's guard. If he were to beat up this guard today, he would probably have to pack up and leave the great western city tonight. Just then, an aristocratic green-haired young man walked past the guard with a model-like female companion. He handed the invitation to the guard with an arrogant expression while throwing a cold glance at Valen and Fong Xingjian. When he saw that Fong Xingjian was dressed in rags and looked like a savage, he chuckled and said, "Ha! The Hunter Blossom Banquet these days is really a place where just anyone wants to sneak in." The moment Fong Xingjian arrived at the great western city, he had gone to register and then brought the wine cup over. Of course, he had not had the time to wash up and dress up. Looking at the green-haired young man's back, Valen clenched his teeth and said to the guard, "Damn it, I'm Valen from the Regional Selection Office. I really have something very important to report to the Commissioner of Education." Fatso Valen pointed at Fong Xingjian and said, "He's a 17-year-old windstorm sword hero and has even attained heaven's perception. Do you guys know the value of this? If, because of you guys, he is unable to register and participate in the regional selection, do you guys know how big of a mistake it would be?" That guard was stunned for a moment and looked in Fong Xingjian's direction. However, he could not tell that Fong Xingjian was a genius who had attained heaven's perception at the age of 17. He looked more like a savage or a beggar. However, seeing that Valen was speaking with such sincerity and did not seem like he was faking it, the few guards exchanged glances and became hesitant. Willen said even more forcefully, "If you can't make the decision, get your leader to come. You can call Steward Sex of the manor. He knows me and knows that I won't speak carelessly." The guards looked at each other and nodded. One of them went to call the housekeeper over. Fong Xingjian frowned and asked, "Can't we just go in?" He casually glanced at the guards and said, "If we go in, they won't even be able to see clearly." Valen immediately covered his mouth and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? This is Governor Devitt's residence. For you to barge in recklessly, are you trying to get beaten to death?" They were different from people like Fong Xingjian, who were not afraid of anything. In the hearts of the natives of the Great Western region, the prestige of the governor, who was the #1 character in the Great Western region, had long been deeply rooted in their hearts. Who would dare to barge in recklessly? Therefore, Valen and Fong Xingjian could only wait at the side, enduring the strange and curious gazes from the nobles. Who are these two fellows? Ha! A grand fatso and a savage. They also want to participate in the Hundred Blossom Banquet. On the other side, the atmosphere of the Hundred Blossom Banquet in the hall was getting more and more enthusiastic. Young men and women from various aristocratic clans and geniuses from the 12 academies were chatting happily. The young man, who had transitioned into a shadow death god, was surrounded by men and women who were smiling and greeting him. They were clearly very curious about this genius who was the only one in the empire so far. However, the young man wore a smug expression and would only reply once out of 10 questions asked. He was indescribably proud. He was the grand disciple of the divine-level expert, the astral ancestor. He had a handsome face and a slender figure. Each of his movements had an extremely elegant rhythm, causing countless aristocratic ladies, young ladies, and female students to surround him. Their gazes were filled with adoration as they looked at him. Clearly, this guy only needed to curl his finger slightly, and he would be able to get these women to take turns to climb into his bed. He was the only man in this batch who had awakened heaven's perception before the second transition. Similarly, there was no lack of people who were interested in him. However, most of them were aristocratic men who were above 30 years of age. They valued one's abilities more than their job titles and divine-level backgrounds. It was because the first two geniuses could only be befriended. He was the only one who did not have a strong background and was extremely talented. Therefore, there was a chance for him to be his subordinate. The elegant David moved through the ball with ease, greeting many young men and young ladies with great familiarity. He smiled and said to Lilia, "I know about you. I heard that you've fallen for a blind man. I think his name is Fong Xingjian." Lilia turned her head abruptly, her eyes staring at David like a ferocious beast that had just awakened. "Say that again?" "It's the same even if I say it 100 times. David flicked his hair and smiled, saying, "A blind man will be a blind man. Moreover, he has already left the academy. With your status, it's impossible for you to—" With a bang, Lilia punched out toward David's face. However, it was easily caught by his palm. His palm was fair and tender, like a woman's palm. However, it contained an extremely terrifying power. It caught Lilia's fist easily and then clenched tightly. Lilia let out a stifled snort and retracted her palm abruptly, feeling a piercing pain coming from her small hand. David said coldly, "Women must learn to be obedient. In the future, if I find out that you're going to attack me again, it won't be as simple as today." As he spoke, he put out a hand and grabbed out toward Lilia. Lilia wanted to dodge, but she discovered that the other party's palm seemed to distort space and time. With a flash, he grabbed Lilia's back and lifted her up like a kitten. Lilia still wanted to struggle, but she discovered that with just a slight tremble of his palm, the force in her body dissipated. He then gently lifted her up and walked out. David's control over his strength was clearly extremely exquisite. Carrying Lilia like this, it looked as if he was hugging her. He gently shook her spine, making Lilia walk with him. David said in a low voice, "Lily, your father thinks highly of our future. Therefore, it's best that you don't do anything unnecessary. Sigh, after all, you've spent too much time in Cursed. How can you be compared to me, who's been living in the great western city since young? You don't understand how big this world is. Those geniuses in Cursed are just slightly outstanding ordinary people here." Lilia wanted to say something, wanted to shout out loud, but she discovered that a force had taken control of her throat, causing her to be unable to say a single word. Just as they were speaking softly, a female voice suddenly rang out, "Lilia, you're here too?" Lilia and David suddenly turned their heads and saw a valiant and formidable-looking lady. Anyone who saw her at first glance would only think of her as a heroine. It was Rhoda, one of Cursed Academy's 3 great geniuses. Rhoda's long hair was casually draped over her shoulders. Her long and slender thighs were wrapped up by a leather clip, revealing her fit and alluring figure. David's eyes narrowed slightly as he asked, "Lily, who is this?" Chapter 199. I'm cursed, Rhoda. Rhoda threw a glance at Lilia and David, a puzzled look in her eyes. Just then, Edgar had already rushed over with Hamel and Ralph. When he saw David, he grinned and greeted him. "Isn't this the son of Mongol City's city lord? Young Master David, you're here to participate in the Hundred Blossom Banquet as well?" Seeing how submissive Edgar was, David lifted his head and said with slight arrogance, I'm going to meet Master Llewellyn. If there's nothing else, you guys can continue chatting later." With that, he left with Lilia. Before he left, he cast a long glance at Rhoda. Edgar said to Hamel and the other two, "Look at him. This is the demeanor of a great aristocrat. I heard that David has been living in the Great Western region since young and has received the most elite education. Look at his disposition and actions. Sigh, but I heard that he's also going to participate in the regional selection this time around. He'll probably be able to get into the top 5. He turned to Hamel and said, "Remember, this David is probably even stronger than you. If you meet him in the competition, you must be careful." Rhoda asked doubtfully, "Lilia seems to be controlled by him. What has that got to do with you?" Edgar continued, "Remember, this is the Great Western region. Any young master could have a strong background and have quite a few conferred knights in his family. Be careful and don't cause trouble." Hamel said, "I know. Right. He said that he's going to meet Master Llewellyn. Why don't we follow him?" Hearing Hamel's words, excitement flashed in Edgar's eyes. That was the first disciple of a divine-level expert. It was said that his abilities were comparable to Governor Devitt's. Edgar nodded vigorously. Come. Let's also go listen to Master Llewellyn's teachings." On the other side, there were no longer any aristocrats entering or leaving. It was because everyone had entered the hall to participate in the banquet. There were also a few flirtatious cheese who had wanted to sneak in with the aristocrats but were unable to do so. They smiled as they looked at Fong Xingjian, Fatso, and Willen. They wanted to rely on their youth and beauty to be fancied by some aristocrat so that they could be brought into the gathering and get to know the aristocrats. But now that the banquet had already begun and everyone who should go in had already gone in, it was naturally hopeless for them to stay here. One of the short-haired girls said, "Hey, you two, the reason you came up with the sneak in is too lousy. Haha, why don't you two look in a mirror? If you're going to attend a banquet, you should at least dress up." That's right. One is as fat as a pig, while the other is as dirty as a savage. Both of them want to attend the governor's banquet. After the girls finished speaking, they all burst into laughter. Obviously, they did not hear the conversation between Valen and the guards. Because they did not have the opportunity to do so today, they mocked Valen and Fong Xingjian, wanting to vent their anger. On the other side, one of the governor's stewards, Sex, was at the main entrance, giving orders to the servants. All kinds of famous wines, desserts, and fruits were being transported into the hall. After directing the logistics, Sex began to walk into the hall and inspect the work situation in the hall, constantly instructing the servants to solve any unexpected problems. After instructing the maids to send a drunk aristocrat young lady to the guest room, Sex came to the center of the hall and saw that Master Yulin was like the moon surrounded by stars, surrounded by countless aristocrats and geniuses. It was not just because he was a level 29 expert, but also because of the holy sea of truth behind him. As the #1 religion in the world, many aristocrats in the great western city believe in the church. In their eyes, Master Llewellyn was someone who carried the God of Truth's will. Master Llewellyn himself wore a benevolent expression, looking at everyone like he was looking at his own children. He did not say a word, merely listening to everyone's complaints and nodding occasionally. However, he also brought endless warmth and sunshine. Seeing this scene, Steward Sex could not help but slow down his pace. He wanted to meet this Archbishop of the Holy See of Truth, the eldest disciple of the divine-level expert, the Holy Orison. An aristocratic lady said, "Master, why have you come to the great western city this time around?" "That's right, Master. Tell us. Let's help you. In the crowd, David, who had brought Lilia with him, Rhoda, who had followed Edgar, and the others all looked over. They were also extremely curious about why Master Llewellyn had come to the Great Western region. Unlike how he had not answered any of the questions in the past, this time around, Llewellyn opened his mouth. The moment he opened his mouth, a crisp sound like that of pearls falling on a plate rang out. This time around, I've come down the mountain under Master's instructions. I'm looking for someone. What? Lord Holy Orzen is looking for someone? Who is Lord Holy Orzen looking for? Is it an enemy? Master, quickly tell us who it is. We'll take action together. Even if we have to turn the Great Western region upside down, we'll definitely help Master find out who it is. Looking at the crowd's surging emotions, Llewellyn smiled and said, Everyone, don't be anxious. This time, I didn't come down the mountain to find an enemy. It's just that Master has been quiet for too long and wants to find a disciple. What? Lord Holy Orzen is looking for a final disciple. To think that Lord Holy Orzen is looking for a disciple. This is definitely earth-shattering news. To be able to become Lord Holy Orzen's disciple, even the regional selection doesn't matter. Hearing Master Llewellyn's words, the atmosphere was immediately ignited, as if gasoline had been ignited. Anderson, who had transitioned into the Shadow Death God, raised his head. For the first time, an excited smile appeared on his cold face. He had transitioned into a first transition job that no one in the Empire had succeeded in for the past 200 years. Could it be that the Holy Orzen was here to look for him? David, who was still holding on to Lilia, narrowed his eyes and his heart thumped violently. If he could become the Holy Orzen's disciple, how could he just reach the heavens in a single bound? He would be second only to one and above all others. Uncontrollably, a look of ambition appeared in the depths of his eyes. Behind Edgar, Rhoda, Hamel, and Ralph were all agitated. The Holy Orzen's disciple, the successor to a divine-level expert. Which one of them did not want to become one? After hearing Llewellyn's words, all of them puffed out their chests, as if wanting to attract Llewellyn's attention. Even Edgar, who was already in his 40s, had a strange look in his eyes. Rhoda even shouted out directly, May I know what specific requirements the Holy Orzen has in mind to take in a disciple? That's right. What kind of disciple was he looking for? Everyone turned their burning gazes toward Llewellyn, anticipating his answer. It was as if they would be lucky enough to be chosen. Seeing that Master Llewellyn was about to speak, a young guard carefully squeezed in next to Steward Sex and whispered into his ear, Lord Sex, there are two people by the name of Valen and Fongxin John who wish to meet the governor. They don't have an invitation, but they said. Steward Sex's attention was all focused on Llewellyn, anticipating the other party to state the requirements for becoming a disciple. How could he have the energy to listen to the guard's report? He waved his hand and interrupted the guard, saying, If they don't have an invitation, then tell them to scram. Why are they looking for me for such a small matter? That guard looked at Sex with an aggrieved expression and said, But that Valen said that Fongxin John is already shut up and scram. After chasing the guard away, Sex continued to turn his gaze toward Master Llewellyn. Llewellyn said softly, Everyone has misunderstood. This time around, I'm not heading down the mountain to help Master recruit a disciple. It's because Master has already decided on who his final disciple will be. I'm only here to bring him up the mountain. Chapter 200. What? To think that the divine-level expert, the Holy Orzen, had already decided on his disciple. Who is it? Who could it be? At this moment, be it Shadow Death God Anderson, David who was hugging Lilia, or even Hamel, Rhoda, Ralph, or even Edgar, all of them could not help but breathe heavily. Although they knew that the possibility of them being chosen was very low, humans were creatures that loved to fantasize. Otherwise, there would not be such a thing as a lottery. Therefore, although the possibility was very low, everyone could not help but feel anticipation, waiting for Llewellyn to announce his name. A knight trembled and said, I wonder who the Guardian King is going to take in as his disciple. Llewellyn smiled and said, Cursed Royal Academy, Fongxin John. Cursed Royal Academy, Fong Xingjian. These words were like 10 bombs that were stuffed into Edgar's mind. His body trembled, as if he could not believe that the other party would say this name. He shouted, "What did he say? What did Master Yuelin say?" Only Rhoda remained calm, but her expression was still extremely complicated. She sighed and said, "Fong Xingjian, it's Fong Xingjian. The Guardian King is going to take in Fong Xingjian as his last disciple." Hamel and Ralph's expressions were also extremely complicated. There was disappointment, envy, but most of them were pure jealousy. There was no way they would not be jealous. To be taken in as a disciple by a divine-level expert. How fortunate and honored was this? How bright would one's future be? Even conferred knights would definitely be envious and jealous, let alone them. David, who had been grabbing onto Lilia, was also stunned. Fong Xingjian? That blind man, Fong Xingjian? Why is it him? Hints of cold, killing intent appeared in David's eyes, and maniacal jealousy surged up in his heart. Shadow Death God Anderson, who was at the back of the crowd, also frowned, thinking about what kind of person Fong Xingjian was. Holt, who was surrounded by countless young ladies and aristocratic ladies, as the grand disciple of the divine-level expert, the astral ancestor, naturally knew how important a divine-level expert was. Just like his identity as a third-generation disciple, he didn't even need to do anything himself. All kinds of resources, secret manuals, properties, and gold coins would be sent to him in an endless stream. Fong Xingjian, the one who transitioned into a windstorm sword hero? Holt smiled at ease. I wonder what kind of person he is. In any case, it was impossible for him to be accepted as a disciple by the Holy Orzen again. Naturally, he would not be hostile towards this Fong Xingjian. On the other side, Steward Sex was stunned. Fong Xingjian? Fong Xingjian? He immediately came to a realization. Just now, his subordinate had told him that there was someone called Fong Xingjian waiting outside the door. Oh no! He immediately rushed out and rushed in the direction of the gate. Valen and Fong Xingjian were still waiting in the direction of the gate. The few young ladies at the side were already planning to leave. They looked at Valen and said, "Hey, aren't you guys going together? Why are you still waiting here foolishly? Ha ha ha. No one will be late for the 100 Blossom Banquet. I think you guys should go back earlier. It's a waste of time to wait." Just as the few young ladies were leaving and teasing Valen and Fong Xingjian, Steward Sex ran out hurriedly, following behind a few guards. The moment he came out, he looked in the direction of Fong Xingjian, Fatso, and Valen. Fatso, Valen, smiled and went up to him, saying, "Steward Sex, long time no see. Do you still remember me? I'm Valen, the one who came here to meet the governor previously. I'm from the Regional Selection Office." However, faced with Valen's words, Sex did not react at all. With a slight turn of his body, he brought along a series of afterimages and passed by Valen, appearing right before Fong Xingjian, displaying the abilities of a knight. He looked at Fong Xingjian and said passionately, "Are you young Master Fong Xingjian?" Cursed Royal Academy's Fong Xingjian. Fong Xingjian replied, "I'm Fong Xingjian." Sex immediately smiled, grabbed Fong Xingjian's hand passionately, and dragged him toward the manor, saying, "Ha, this is great. Please come with me. Everyone's discussing you." Valen was blocked at the back, and he shouted, "Hey, hey, hey, where's me?" Fong Xingjian turned and lifted his chin in Valen's direction, saying, "He's with me." Sex snapped his fingers, and Fatso and Valen were let in. The young ladies were standing in a row outside the door, looked at this scene with their eyes and mouths agape. Although they had not entered the upper class in the great western city, they had a good understanding of the various affairs of the aristocrats. The short-haired young lady who had been the first to tease Fong Xingjian said, "That was Steward Sex, right?" The governor's 3 stewards were all knights. Not only were they very strong, but they also had the backing of the governor. Another young lady gulped and said, "I saw the regional region's finance department's registrar being very respectful before him. Even Steward Sex was a little cold. What was going on earlier? What else could it be? That guy. Did you guys hear his name? Forget it. He must be an important character, an extremely important character. Otherwise, why would Steward Sex come out personally to welcome him? Did you guys see that smile on his face? Fong Xingjian. That guy's name is Fong Xingjian. I heard it clearly. Another young lady suddenly said anxiously, "This is bad. We were joking with him earlier. He wouldn't remember us, would he?" Thinking of this, the few coquettish asterisk cheese suddenly wore terrified expressions. Valen followed behind Sex, looking at the jade flooring on the walkway, the over 1,000 lampposts in the surroundings, and the various luxurious decorations. His eyes were filled with great astonishment. The Hunter Blossom banquet this time around was even more luxurious and beautiful than the manner he had seen previously. However, Fong Xingjian did not have much of a reaction. After all, although the people in Miracle World had strong martial prowess, they were at least several hundred years behind Earth in terms of architecture, decorations, and energy. The city center of any first-tier city was much more beautiful than this place. Therefore, how could Fong Xingjian possibly feel astonished? Just as they were walking, two people suddenly dashed out from the bushes. One was a green-haired aristocrat, and the other was a young lady who looked like a model. Their clothes were in a mess, and as they walked, they were still tidying themselves up. It was clear that they had been playing games in the bushes earlier. "Why have you come in?" The moment they came out and saw Fong Xingjian, they were shocked. They were just about to shout when they saw Sex, who was next to Fong Xingjian. Sex frowned and said, "Young Master Gable, please mind your status." The other party was the governor's wife, Miss Hathaway's family. Although he could not stand his behavior, he could not reprimand him too much. The green-haired young man scratched his head awkwardly, clearly a little afraid of this steward. However, he immediately pointed at Fong Xingjian and said, "Steward Sex, why did you bring this person in? He's a hooligan who wants to sneak into the Hunter Blossom banquet." He had even despised Fong Xingjian at the entrance earlier. How could he have expected to meet him here, and for him to see such an embarrassing scene? Sex frowned and said solemnly, "Young Master Gable, please don't spout nonsense. This young Master Fong Xingjian is Master's honored guest, the person Master Yueluan is looking for." With that, he continued to welcome Fong Xingjian in with an enthusiastic expression. When Valen passed by, he even rolled his eyes at the green-haired young man, revealing a disdainful expression. Seeing the three of them leave, the green-haired young man was left in a daze, not knowing what on earth had happened. "This won't do. Where on earth did this guy come from? I'm going to follow him and take a look. If he manages to sneak in through some means, I'll kill him." Chapter 201. After Un said the holy Orizon wanted to take in Fong Xingjian as his disciple, he looked at the hall which had erupted into an uproar, smiled, and said, "I heard that Madame Hathaway is holding the 100 Blossom Banquet, inviting all the genius students from the 12 academies in the Great Western region. Fong Xingjian has transitioned into a windstorm sword hero and should be considered a genius from Cursed Royal Academy. That's why I'm here to look for him." From afar, a lady who appeared elegant and mature, but whose face and figure were maintained like that of a young lady in her 20s, smiled and said, "The 100 Blossom Banquet will naturally invite all the talents from the Great Western region. It's to allow the elites of the Great Western region to gather together and have a good exchange, and also to announce the contents of this year's regional selection." Saying that, Hathaway looked toward the crowd and asked, "I wonder where Fong Xingjian is?" As she spoke, her lungs trembled, as if there were waves of vigorous energy vibrating the air, easily transmitting each of her words into everyone's ears. Everyone quietened down, as if they wanted to see how a genius who could transition into a windstorm sword hero and be highly regarded by a divine-level expert would look like. Lilia was also agitated, her eyes darting around. She was excited that Fong Xingjian had been taken in as a disciple by a divine-level expert, but she was also looking forward to whether Fong Xingjian would come to this banquet. This was her true motive for coming to the 100 Blossom Banquet. However, amidst the silence, no one stepped out. Hathaway called out again, but seeing that no one stepped out, she immediately frowned and asked directly, Are there any people from Cursed Academy here today? Which one of you is from Cursed Academy? Please raise your hand. This time around, Edgar could no longer pretend that he had not heard. He slowly raised his hand helplessly and immediately saw countless fiery gazes looking toward him. Hathaway looked at him and asked directly, "Who are you? Where's Headmaster Jackson? Is Feng Xingjia not here?" Edgar gulped. When had he ever been the center of attention of so many influential people in the great western city? He felt that under the countless gazes, his entire body felt a little weak. Especially Hathaway's gaze. That was the governor's wife. He replied nervously, "Headmaster Jackson has fallen ill and is recuperating in Cursed. I'm a deputy headmaster Edgar, and I'm here to attend the banquet on behalf of Headmaster Jackson." That, Feng Xingjia. At the mention of Feng Xingjia, his face flushed red, and he felt extremely awkward, unable to advance or retreat. He did not know what to say at all. Was he supposed to say that Feng Xingjia was missing? Pushed away. In front of all the aristocrats in the entire great western city, Cursed Royal Academy was labeled as incompetent, lacking in control, and lacking in teaching capabilities. Hathaway asked impatiently, "What's going on? Don't you even know how to speak?" Edgar hemmed and hawed, but he couldn't say a word. Just as Edgar was in a dilemma, and Hathaway's gaze was getting colder and colder. Sex finally brought Feng Xingjia to the main hall. He smiled and said, "I'm sorry, madam. There's been a misunderstanding, and that's why young Master Feng Xingjia has come in." In that instant, Sex attracted everyone's gazes. Everyone's gazes went past this steward and landed on Fatso, Valen, and Feng Xingjia, who were behind him. Fatso and Valen did not seem to be related to the Windstorm Sword hero. Moreover, as an official of the Great Western City, he was naturally recognized by many people present. Hathaway smiled, looked at Feng Xingjia and said, "You're Feng Xingjia, Cursed City's Windstorm Sword hero?" Therefore, everyone's gazes gradually gathered on Feng Xingjia. Looking at this young man with disheveled hair and a dirty face, dressed in rags, and looking like a beggar, the aristocrats could not help but have expressions of ridicule, mockery, envy, or admiration. All sorts of emotions, along with jealousy, were directed towards Feng Xingjia. This is Feng Xingjia? Ha! I can't tell what's so special about him. Where did this guy come from? He looks like a savage. He's not even comparable to me. What right does he have to become the disciple of a divine-level expert? What do you know? It's obvious that he's just returned from tough training. It's true that behind every successful person, there are countless hardships and hard work. If it was said that the others were only feeling jealous and envious, then David and Shadow Death God Andre's gazes were filled with jealousy and killing intent as they looked at Feng Xingjia. Becoming the disciple of a divine-level expert was something that would attract too much hatred. However, what kind of person was Feng Xingjia? He was blind. Therefore, he acted as if he did not feel anything and looked straight in the direction of a lady who had spoken earlier, Hathaway. Although he was unable to see beyond 10 meters, he could still hear where the voice had come from. He closed his eyes and looked at Hathaway, saying, "I'm Feng Xingjia." Looking at Feng Xingjia's closed eyes, Hathaway said, "I heard that you were poisoned in the battle with Garcia's destined warrior. Have your eyes recovered yet?" Feng Xingjia said calmly, "No." Hathaway smiled and said, "But that's fine. You should remember this day. It's your lucky day." Hearing that Feng Xingjia was blind, the jealousy and envy in everyone's eyes grew even stronger. Everyone knew that the Holy Orzen was the only one among the 10 divine-level experts in the Empire who specialized in healing. Not only was he able to be taken in as his disciple, but he could also treat his eyes. How great of an honor was this? Everyone looked at Feng Xingjia, wishing that they could replace him. Edgar's body trembled incessantly, as if he had been knocked out by waves of bombs. He was also excited and astonished that Feng Xingjia was about to be taken in as a disciple by a divine-level expert. However, he also felt uneasy and afraid because he had not valued Feng Xingjia and had ostracized Feng Xingjia in the past. These two emotions filled up his body at the same time, making him feel as if he had been injected with chicken blood. When Fang Xingjian heard Hathaway's question, he felt a little puzzled. He was really puzzled because he did not know that the divine-level expert, the holy Orzen, was already planning to take him in as a disciple. Seeing Fang Xingjian's puzzled expression, Hathaway turned and looked at Master Yuelun. However, she frowned slightly. It was because Master Yuelun's gaze was fixed on Fang Xingjian, as if he had seen something unbelievable. It was only when Hathaway coughed softly that Master Yuelun regained his senses. However, his gaze when looking at Fang Xingjian was still a little strange. How is this possible? How is it possible that they are so alike? Is this a coincidence, or... At this moment, he suddenly had a terrifying conjecture about why his teacher had asked him to take in Fang Xingjian as his disciple. However, he was a level 29 grade expert, after all. Therefore, there were no changes in his expression. He looked at Fang Xingjian with a benevolent expression and said, "Fang Xingjian, my teacher is the holy Orzen. After seeing your information, teacher is very interested in your situation. I wonder if you're willing to follow teacher and learn and cultivate on the sacred mountain." In that instant, everyone's gazes were focused on Fang Xingjian, waiting for his reply and waiting for this historic moment. Chapter 202. However, unlike what everyone had expected, Fang Xingjian did not agree right away. He did not let joy get to his head and replied excitedly. His expression remained calm. Amidst the silence, he asked calmly, "May I know what your request is?" Hearing this question, everyone looked at Fang Xingjian with their eyes and mouths agape. What was he asking? To think that he was asking a divine-level expert if he had any requests for him to be his disciple. Did he think that this was a private tutor collecting tuition fees? However, Master Yuelun's face still wore an extremely affectionate smile. He walked slowly up to Fang Xingjian and said, "Child, don't think too much. Teacher won't have any requests from you when he's taking in disciples. If there's anything, it'll be that you must stay on the sacred mountain and cultivate for 5 years. After the 5 years are up, you must pass teacher's assessment before you can leave the mountain. This will save teacher's reputation. I have to stay on the mountain for 5 years. Must I stay for a full 5 years?" Hearing that, Fang Xingjian's brows furrowed fiercely. Yuelun was stunned for a moment, as if he had not expected Fang Xingjian to be so conflicted over this question. By right, no matter what kind of genius one was, upon hearing that a divine-level expert wanted to take them in as a disciple, they should have agreed excitedly. Why was it that this kid was still looking as if he was worried that they would scam him out of his money? Yuelun shook his head and gave it some thought. Thinking that he had seen through Fang Xingjian's worries, he said, "Do you have any relatives or friends? It's fine. You can bring them up to the sacred mountain." If it were an ordinary person, Yuelun would have ignored him after his repeated hesitation. However, when he saw Fang Xingjian's face, he could not help but go along with the other party's wishes out of habit. When Fang Xingjian and Yuelun were conversing, everyone's eyeballs almost popped out from shock as they looked at the two of them in disbelief. Master Yuelun was very polite and enthusiastic to Fang Xingjian, as if he was his own son. Was this still the holy Orzen's chief disciple that they knew? When David saw Fang Xingjian and Yuelun's expressions, he felt as if his lungs were about to explode. He wished that he could replace them and prove that he was Fang Xingjian. Hearing Yuelun's reply, Fang Xingjian shook his head. "I have things to do. I can't stay for 5 years." He thought about it, but in the end, he still didn't reveal his two biggest secrets, that he only had 4 years left to live and that he needed to take revenge. This was too inappropriate, very inappropriate. Once he revealed it, there would be too many variables. Upon hearing Fang Xingjian's answer, Yuelun seemed to be extremely surprised. However, he wouldn't give in on this point. He replied seriously, "During the 5 years that I've been on the mountain, I have to fast, bathe, and burn incense daily. This is the customary rule of the Holy See of Truth. Even when teacher first came here, he didn't change it. Only the traders of our sect would descend the mountain early." Hearing this reply, Feng Xingjian fell silent. He was contemplating whether he should continue to participate in the regional selection and advance to the national selection, or join the Holy Orison and betray them when he was strong enough. Just as Feng Xingjian was silent, the gazes of the people around him became even stranger. Was this Feng Xingjian a fool? To reject a divine-level expert? What on earth was he thinking? Many people had the urge to rush up and agree to it on Feng Xingjian's behalf. Edgar could not care less and jogged toward Feng Xingjian, criticizing him. Feng Xingjian, are you a fool? The Guardian King wants to take you in as his disciple, and that's your good fortune. What are you still hesitating for? Hurry up and agree to it. He really wanted to press down on Feng Xingjian's head and agree immediately. How great of a good thing was this? It was not only good for Feng Xingjian, but also for Cursed. For a student to be specially sent by a divine-level expert to be taken in as a disciple. How great of a publicity would this be for Cursed Academy? How great of a reputation would this be? Cursed Academy would definitely become famous in the entire empire. Who knew how many people would rush here to participate in the prefectural selection and then join Cursed Academy? Moreover, this was in front of almost half of the aristocrats in the great western city. Edgar felt that he had gained a lot of face by giving Feng Xingjian such guidance. In the future, if word were to spread that it was under his guidance that Feng Xingjian had turned over a new leaf and joined the Holy Orison, how much face would he gain? It would be a legendary story between a teacher and a disciple. How could someone like Edgar, who cared a lot about his reputation, not be overjoyed? However, faced with Edgar's criticism, before Edgar could even feel happy for even a second, Feng Xingjian lifted his leg and kicked him in the chest. With a bang, Edgar was sent flying out of the crowd. He said impatiently, long-winded, how much had his strength improved after almost 3 months of tough training? How fast had his speed been? Especially after attaining heaven's perception, he could see everything within a 10-meter radius even clearer than with his eyes. Coupled with the use of unparalleled sword intent, Apex, he had instantly hit Edgar's flaw. Edgar had not put up his guard at all. He had not expected that Feng Xingjian would attack him in front of so many aristocrats. Who would have thought that Feng Xingjian would be so daring? When he had been attacked, he had been in a daze. It was only when he had knocked into a dining table and all sorts of soup and water had splattered all over him that he came to his senses. However, it was already too late. Even though he had used his reduced force field to get rid of the rubbish around him, he was still drenched. There was even a big footprint on his shirt on his chest. The gazes of the several hundred aristocrats in the surroundings were looking at him, and it was as if they were beams of lasers filled with killing intent. Edgar cherished his reputation so much that he had lost face before all the aristocrats in the great western city. He was so embarrassed and infuriated that his face was flushed red. He could not even stay for a second longer. He let out a furious bellow and dashed out of the hall in the manor, not daring to meet the gazes of any of the aristocrats. However, his actions did not attract too much attention. After thinking for a long while, Feng Xingjian still replied, "My minimum limit is 2 years. Within 2 years, I must leave the mountain." Llewellyn shook his head. There's no precedent for this in the holy sea of truth. Feng Xingjian shrugged. Then I can only apologize. I won't be able to go to the sacred mountain to study. Valen finally had the courage to interrupt, saying, Feng Xingjian, are you crazy? You're rejecting the Guardian King? He quickly said to Master Llewellyn, his mind isn't clear, and he's turned into a fool from cultivating. Let him think about it carefully. However, Feng Xingjian was unmoved. Master Llewellyn's brows furrowed as he looked at Feng Xingjian's face. That familiar feeling caused him to be in a daze. He smiled and said, since that's the case, then I won't force it. Let's just leave it to fate. David looked at this scene and felt extremely excited. He thought that Feng Xingjian was really a rotten wood that could not be carved. To think that he had rejected such a good opportunity and ended up offending Master Llewellyn instead. The host of the banquet, Hathaway, also frowned slightly. She felt that Feng Xingjian really did not know how to appreciate favors and had destroyed the good atmosphere of the banquet. The astral ancestor's grand disciple looked at Fang Xingjian and smiled with interest, as if he was looking at a weirdo. Interesting, interesting. Haha, this Fang Xingjian is dead meat. To think that a blind man dares to be so arrogant. To think that he rejected the Guardian King's invitation. He's a B** starred. If he were to participate in this year's regional selection, I'll definitely kill him to atone for his sin of looking down on the church. Just then, Fang Xingjian spoke again. May I ask where the governor is? I wish to participate in this year's regional selection, but I'm late for the registration. Hearing Fang Xingjian's words, everyone looked at Fang Xingjian as if they were looking at a fool. An idiot who had rejected a divine-level expert, a blind man, and a knight who was late for the registration. To think that he still wanted to participate in the regional selection? Everyone was waiting for Governor Devitt's reply, looking forward to how he would humiliate this Fang Xingjian. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.